By the time Dante Bellafiore understood that the safest room in his casino had become a trap, the quiet woman from his kitchen was already dragging him through smoke, broken glass, and the kind of silence that only comes after men stop breathing. For almost a year, Mafia Boss had carried trays past his guards, with her eyes lowered and flour on her sleeves. She had been the woman no one remembered, the heavy overnight supervisor with the limp, the soft voice, the round face, and the shapeless black uniform that made her look like part of the kitchen walls. Men with guns stepped around her. Men with money spoke over her. Men who thought fear was the same thing as power never once wondered why a woman who moved that slowly always knew exactly where every exit was. The Crown Heron Casino glittered over New Orleans, like a crown set too close to dark water. From the street, it looked like a palace of gold lights, glass balconies, velvet ropes, and music that never really stopped. Tourists came for champagne, cards, and the feeling that luck might choose them for one night. But beneath the bright casino floor, beneath the kitchens and locked counting rooms, beneath the private elevators that only opened for Dante's people, the old river tunnels waited in the dark. They had been there long before the casino, damp and narrow and breathing warm steam through cracked brick. Most people working inside the Crown Heron had heard stories about them. Mara had mapped them. She worked the overnight shift because the night belonged to people who did not ask many questions. At 11, the public restaurants slowed down. The tourists grew drunk and loud, and the real guests began to arrive. Men in pressed shirts and dark jackets came through the rear entrance with hard eyes and soft footsteps. Dock bosses wanted gumbo at midnight. Card dealers with bruised knuckles wanted coffee so strong it tasted burned. Dante's captains wanted steak, cigarettes, and privacy. Mara gave them all what they asked for. She kept the ovens hot, the knives clean, and her face blank. To the men upstairs, she was harmless. They saw her thick arms lifting heavy trays and thought only of her size. They saw the way she favored one leg when she crossed the tile and thought only of weakness. They saw her lower her gaze whenever they passed and believed it was fear. Mara let them believe all of it. She knew how easy it was for powerful men to mistake quiet for empty. She knew how quickly cruelty made them careless. So she moved through their world like steam, present, useful, ignored, and impossible to hold. She knew that the guard beside the service elevator checked his phone every 13 minutes. She knew the camera outside the dry storage room had a blind spot near the flower racks. She knew the emergency keypad behind the wine wall was wiped clean every morning except for 2 numbers, because Rossi, Dante's security chief, always pressed too hard with his thumb. She knew which men carried knives on the left, which men carried guns on the right, and which men were too proud to notice someone breathing behind them. She knew that the private sky lounge had 3 doors, but only one path that did not pass through a kill zone. And she knew Dante Bellafiore, feared king of the Gulf Coast, had built an empire so tall he had forgotten to look at the woman standing in the kitchen below it. Dante was young for the weight he carried, but no one ever called him young to his face. He ruled gambling, shipping, union contracts, and favors owed by men who wore badges in daylight and took envelopes at night. He had the polished calm of someone who never raised his voice because other people did the shouting for him. His suits were dark, his smile rare, and his anger quiet enough to make a room go cold. When he entered the kitchen, the workers straightened. The captains stopped laughing. Even the old dishwashers kept their heads down. Mara never looked directly at him for more than a second. That was part of the shape she wore, but she noticed him anyway. She noticed the faint stiffness in his left shoulder from an old injury. She noticed that he never sat with his back to a door. She noticed he trusted his adopted brother Nico with matters no one else was allowed to touch. She noticed that he trusted Luca with business, Rossi with security, and himself with everything else. That, Mara thought, was his greatest weakness. Dante believed betrayal would have a stranger's face. The storm came on a Thursday. rolling in from the Gulf with thunder that shook the casino windows. Rain washed the streets silver, and the river rose dark and restless against the old stone walls below. By midnight, the casino was still busy, but the air had changed. People laughed too loudly. Glasses clinked too sharply. The building seemed to hold its breath between every roll of thunder. Mara felt it before anyone told her about the meeting upstairs. She saw 3 extra guards by the private elevator. She saw Luca come through the kitchen without touching his food. She saw Rossi snap at a dealer for standing in the wrong place. Then one of Dante's men pushed through the swinging doors and told her the boss wanted a late tray in the restricted lounge. Nothing messy, he said. Nothing that dripped. Men like him always thought the food mattered. Mara prepared roasted chicken, charred peppers, warm bread, olives, and a pot of dark coffee. Her hands moved slowly where others could see, but her mind moved through the casino with perfect speed. Restricted lounge, sky level, dock representatives, missing shipment, union pressure. Rossi nervous, Luca quiet, storm covering sound. Something was wrong. She loaded the tray and took the service elevator up alone. The metal box hummed softly around her. Her reflection in the brushed steel looked like the woman she had spent years building. Wide body, tired eyes, hair pinned back. Flower at one cuff, a limp that came and went just enough to be believed. She looked like someone no enemy would waste a bullet on. The doors opened into a private hallway above the casino, where the carpet was thick enough to swallow footsteps, and the walls were lined with gold-framed mirrors. Mara pushed the tray forward, her limp just a little heavier than usual. At the end of the hall, the Sky Lounge doors stood open. Dante was inside, near the windows, the storm lighting his profile in pale flashes. Luca stood to his right, one hand near his jacket. Rossi stood by the bar, his thick neck flushed with anger as he argued with 2 dockmen who looked like they wished they were anywhere else. The room smelled of rain, leather, expensive smoke, and the sharp edge of fear people tried to hide under cologne. Mara entered with her eyes down. Rossi saw her first and curled his lip. "Move faster," he muttered. "You sound like a dying horse dragging that cart." The dockmen laughed because Rossi laughed. Luca did not. Dante did not look over. Mara gave a small apology and kept moving. She placed the tray on the side table. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was even. As she poured coffee into small white cups, she listened. A shipment had vanished somewhere between the river warehouses and the eastern docks. Someone had changed the route after Dante signed off. One union contact was missing. Another was dead. Rossi blamed outsiders. Luca blamed panic. Dante blamed no one yet, which made him more dangerous than both of them. Then the lights flickered. It was only a heartbeat of darkness, but Mara's body reacted before her face did. Her eyes lifted to the mirror beside the bar. In the reflection, she saw the private elevator numbers freeze. She saw Rossi glance toward his earpiece. She saw Dante's hand move half an inch toward his jacket. The blast came from the service entrance. It did not sound like the wild explosion of street violence. It was too clean for that, too shaped. The reinforced door folded inward with a hard metallic scream, and smoke rolled across the lounge in a gray wave. Marble cracked. Glass burst. Someone shouted. Someone else fell. The first shots were soft, almost polite, because the rifles were suppressed. Luca died before he cleared his holster. Rossi fired twice toward the smoke, then jerked backward as the window behind him bloomed red. A sniper from outside. Clean angle. High roof. Mara registered it all while the room broke apart around her. The dockmen dropped under the table. Dante was thrown behind the bar, blood at his temple, his pistol sliding across the floor and spinning out of reach. Through the smoke came men who did not move like local crews. Their steps were measured. Their shoulders stayed low. Their rifles swept corners in disciplined arcs. They wore black gear without markings, faces hidden, voices clipped through encrypted comms. They were not here to scare anyone. They were here to erase. The lead attacker stepped over Luca's body and raised his rifle toward Dante. For the first time in nearly a year, Mafia Boss stopped pretending to be slow. She crossed the room with a force no one expected from the quiet kitchen woman. Her limp vanished. Her shoulders dropped. Her body drove forward like a storm breaking loose from its cage. She hit Dante hard enough to knock the breath out of him and slammed him behind a marble column just as bullets tore through the place where his chest had been. Dante stared at her, stunned and furious, one hand gripping her sleeve. "What are you doing?" "Saving you," Mara said. Her voice was still soft, but something inside it had changed. It no longer asked permission to exist. She grabbed the front of his shirt and pulled him low. Dante was not a small man, but Mara moved him with brutal certainty, using his weight, the broken floor, and the cover of smoke like she had rehearsed it 100 times. He tried to resist, more from shock than sense, but she hooked one thick arm around his waist and drove him toward the hidden counting room behind the lounge. His eyes sharpened. "How do you know about that door?" Mara did not answer. She pressed her flour-dusted palm to the carved panel beside the liquor shelves, then entered a rotating code Dante had changed only that morning. The wall unlocked. The narrow vault room opened with a deep mechanical sigh. Inside were emergency ledgers, cash drawers, blackmail files, and armored glass thick enough to stop rifle fire. Mara shoved him in. Dante turned on her with sudden rage. "Open this door!" Instead, she sealed it from the outside. The lock dropped with a heavy final sound. Dante slammed his fist against the glass hard enough to shake it. "Mara!" It was the first time he had ever said her name like it mattered. Smoke curled around her body. The lights pulsed red from the emergency system. Behind the glass, Dante's face shifted from anger to disbelief as Mara stepped backward into the ruined lounge instead of hiding beside him. The first attacker came through the hallway near the vault, rifle raised. He moved carefully, checking the floor, the walls, the corners. He did not check above him. Mara had already climbed onto the decorative beam running beneath the ceiling, her fingers locked around an exposed pipe, her heavy body balanced in the narrow dark like something patient and terrible. When the man passed under her, she dropped. Her full weight struck his shoulders and drove him down with a sharp, final crack. The sound was not loud, but Dante heard it through the glass. His hand lowered from the door, his mouth parted slightly. Mara rolled off the body, took the sidearm, took the knife, and reached beneath her loose kitchen uniform. A compact pistol appeared in her hand, black and familiar against her flour-marked fingers. The second attacker froze when he saw her. For one fatal second, he saw the same thing everyone else had seen, a fat kitchen worker, a woman who should have been crying, a mistake in the middle of a battlefield. Mara fired twice. The first shot slammed into his armor and folded him back. The second found the soft place beneath his jaw. He hit the carpet before his warning left his throat. Behind the armored glass, Dante Bellafiore stood very still. This was a man who had watched killers work since he was a boy. He knew street violence, revenge violence, desperate violence, and professional violence. He knew the difference between a guard with a gun and a weapon-wearing skin. And now, watching Mara move through his private lounge with smoke around her and blood on the floor, he understood with a cold, almost beautiful terror that he had never known what lived inside his own casino. The team leader saw her then. He was smarter than the others. He did not pause. He fired through the smoke, controlled and fast, bullets chewing into the bar, the walls, the column. Mara dropped low behind a rolling cart, kicked it hard, and sent bottles crashing across the floor. Liquor spread like dark water. A flashbang bounced near her foot, but she snatched a velvet curtain from the broken window frame and smothered the device beneath it before the burst could blind her. The room flashed white under the fabric. The sound punched the air. Mara was already moving. The leader advanced, rifle tight to his shoulder. Mara came in low, not graceful, not pretty, not like the thin women in the stories men like to tell. She came in solid. She came in heavy. She came in like her body had always been a promise waiting to be kept. Her shoulder drove into his ribs and slammed him into the wall, his rifle trapped between them. His breath left him in a broken gasp. He reached for his knife, but Mara was faster. Her hand closed around his wrist. Her other hand drove the boning knife up beneath the weak seam of his armor. The man stiffened. Mara leaned close, her round face calm, her soft voice almost gentle. "You should have checked the kitchen." Then she pulled the blade free and let him fall. For a moment, the Sky Lounge was quiet, except for rain, alarms, and Dante's slow breathing behind the glass. Mara stood among broken marble, fallen men, and drifting smoke, her black kitchen uniform torn at one sleeve, her hair loose from its pins, her limp gone as if it had never existed. She searched the team leader's body with quick, practiced hands. When she turned his wrist over, she saw the burned mark in his skin. A black crescent inside a broken circle. The color drained from her face, but not from fear, from recognition. Behind the glass, Dante watched her expression change and felt something inside his world tilt. This attack had not only come for him. This woman had known danger before his name ever touched her life. She had worn invisibility like armor inside his kingdom, and he, like every other arrogant man around him, had mistaken it for weakness. Mara walked back to the vault door and entered the code again. The lock opened. Dante stepped out slowly, blood drying near his temple, his eyes fixed on her as if seeing her for the first time. "Who are you?" he asked. Mara looked past him toward the smoke-filled hall, where more footsteps were already coming. "The reason they're here," she said. And before Dante could demand another answer, she pressed the dead man's rifle into his hands and led him into the walls of his own casino. The walls of the Crown Heron Casino were warmer than Dante expected. Heat rolled through the narrow service passage in slow breaths, carrying the smell of dust, old wires, wet concrete, and something faintly sweet from the kitchens below. He had owned this building for years, had bought politicians to approve it, judges to protect it, and inspectors to ignore the parts of it that should never have passed a single safety report. Yet as Mara pulled him through the hidden passage with one hand on his sleeve and a stolen rifle braced against her shoulder, Dante understood that she knew his fortress better than he did. She did not hesitate at the turns. She did not stop to think. She moved through the bones of his kingdom like she had been living inside them long before he ever put his name on the door. Behind them, boots thundered across the destroyed Sky Lounge. Voices crackled through comms. Men shouted that the primary target had moved. Dante heard that phrase clearly, even through the ringing in his ears. Primary target, not boss. Not Bellafiore, not Dante. He looked at Mara's back, at the torn black fabric of her kitchen uniform, at the way her thick body filled the cramped passage without slowing her down, and a cold realization crawled through him. She had told the truth. The soldiers who had breached his private floor had not come to kill him first. They had come for the woman every one of his men had ignored. Mara stopped at a rusted ladder and looked over her shoulder. Her face was calm, but her eyes were not. Her eyes were far away, fixed on a memory Dante could not see. "Climb down," she whispered. Dante tightened his grip on the rifle. "Not until you tell me what Black Harbor is." For a moment, only the rain answered. It rattled somewhere above them, a soft hiss against glass and steel. Mara stared at him, and for the first time since she had thrown him into the vault, she looked tired. Not weak, never that, but tired in a way that felt older than the storm, older than the casino, older than the name on her fake employee file. Black Harbor is what powerful people hire when they need a crime to look like an accident, she said. They take witnesses, erase rivals, move hostages, bury politicians, and make clean men look dirty and dirty men look dead. They are not a gang. They are not a family. They are a machine. Dante's jaw hardened. And you worked for them. I was one of their knives. She said it plainly. No pride, no apology, just truth. Dante studied her in the dim red emergency glow. The kitchen woman was gone now. The lowered eyes, the slow voice, the uneven walk. All of it had fallen away like a cheap costume. In front of him stood a woman built from secrets, patience, and violence, so controlled it almost felt sacred. He wanted to be angry that she had hidden inside his house. He wanted to demand loyalty, answers, payment. But the dead men upstairs were proof enough that his old rules had already been burned away. What happened? He asked. Mara looked down the ladder shaft. They ordered me to kill someone who could not defend herself. A pregnant witness. She had proof that would ruin a foreign minister. Black Harbor wanted her gone before she could testify. I refused. Dante's eyes narrowed. You walked away? I killed the handler they sent to watch me. I hid the woman. Then I disappeared. Her mouth curved, but it was not a smile. That was years ago. Since then, I have been hotel staff, hospital laundry, bus station janitor, night cook, warehouse cleaner, jobs where rich men and violent men look through you. A fat woman in a kitchen is the best ghost in the world. People see the body and think they have seen the whole person. Something quiet shifted in Dante's chest. He thought of Rossi's cruel mouth, the captains laughing, the dockmen sneering as Mara placed food before them. He thought of himself walking past her for months without ever asking why she noticed everything and said almost nothing. Shame was not an emotion he allowed often. It came now anyway, sharp and unwelcome. A burst of gunfire cracked somewhere above them. Mara turned back to the ladder. They could not have breached your upper floor without help. Someone gave them codes, elevator access, camera timing, everything. Dante went still. The name rose in his mind before he wanted it to. Nico, his adopted brother, his trusted advisor, the man who knew the family houses, the off-book accounts, the way Dante changed the private security codes when the weather turned bad because storms made him uneasy. Dante hated the thought the moment it appeared, but he did not push it away. A ruler survived by listening to the ugliest possibility first. They climbed down through the walls while the casino groaned around them. Somewhere below, alarms wailed over the muffled chaos of the public floor. Guests would be running now, screaming beneath the gold chandeliers, spilling drinks across velvet carpets, calling the police who already owed Dante more favors than they could afford to repay. But none of that mattered inside the service shaft. In there, the world was only metal, breath, heat, and Mara's steady hand reaching back once when Dante's blood-slick fingers slipped on the ladder. They reached the kitchen level through a panel behind the dry storage room. The familiar smell of garlic, oil, flour, and hot metal floated through the air. For a strange second, it looked almost normal. Pots hung from hooks. White towels sat folded near the sinks. A half-cut bundle of parsley waited on a board where Mara had left it less than an hour before. Then a shadow moved near the freezer corridor. Mara pushed Dante back with her elbow. The attacker came around the corner slowly, rifle raised, helmet tilted toward the service door. Mara stepped into view with her shoulders slumped, one hand pressed against her side as if wounded. The man saw the uniform first. He saw the size. He saw what he had been trained by a cruel world to dismiss. His rifle lowered by a fraction. That fraction was all Mara needed. She caught the handle of a boiling stockpot with a towel and hurled the steaming liquid across the tile. The attacker staggered back with a strangled cry. Mara was already moving. She slammed him into the steel prep table hard enough to send knives clattering to the floor, hooked one thick arm across his throat, and drove him down until his body stopped fighting. Dante watched from the storage doorway, his rifle ready but unused, his heartbeat slow and heavy. He had seen men kill with anger. Mara killed with certainty. She took the attacker's weapon, checked his pockets, and found a small encrypted radio. A voice hissed through it, asking for status. Mara crushed it under her shoe. "This way," Dante said quietly, pointing toward a narrow door behind the old dumbwaiter shaft. "There is a cash route below the kitchen. My father used it before the casino went public. It connects to the river tunnels." Mara looked at him. "You are sure?" Dante gave a grim smile. "I may not know my walls as well as you do, but I know where my family hid money." Together they entered the shaft. The passage dropped them into a low corridor where the air changed at once. The casino's perfume of smoke and money vanished. Beneath it was the old city, wet and dark, breathing through brick lungs. Pipes sweated above their heads. Water ran in thin silver lines along the floor. The storm pressed against the world outside, and the river tunnels answered with groans that sounded almost alive. Black Harbor's second team found them there. Mara heard them before Dante did. She lifted one hand, and he stopped. The tunnel ahead was full of steam leaking from a cracked valve. Through the white fog came three shapes, slow and careful. Mara pulled Dante into a side chamber filled with hanging laundry bags from the casino hotel. White cloth swayed softly around them, like ghosts. One soldier passed close enough for Dante to see the black crescent burned into his wrist. Mara moved from behind the hanging bags without a sound. Her arm locked around the man's neck. Her weight turned. Her hip drove back, and he vanished into the drainage channel with barely a splash. The second soldier turned toward the sound, and Dante fired once, striking the wall near his head. The man ducked by instinct, right into Mara's reach. She hit the steam valve with the butt of her rifle. Hot vapor burst across the tunnel, and the man stumbled blind. Mara drove him into the brick, took his weapon, and left him folded at the base of the wall. The last one tried to run. Mara shot him low, not to kill. He went down hard, sliding through shallow water, gasping beneath the red blink of an old emergency bulb. Dante approached with the rifle trained on him, but Mara crouched first. Her face was close to the wounded man's, soft and calm, in a way that made the soldier tremble more than shouting ever could. "Who opened the Crown Heron?" she asked. The man spat something ugly through his pain. Mara pressed 2 fingers to the mark on his wrist. His face went white. "Who?" she asked again. The soldier looked from Mara to Dante, and his fear made the tunnel feel colder. "Nico Bellafiore," he whispered. "He gave us the access. He gave us the timing. He said you would both be dead before dawn." Dante did not move. For one long moment, he became so still that even Mara looked up at him carefully. The river dripped around them. Thunder moved above the city like a giant dragging chains through the clouds. Dante's face emptied of expression, but his eyes told the truth. Grief hit him first. Not loud, not dramatic, just a silent crack inside the man who thought blood and loyalty could still mean something in his world. Then the grief turned into rage. "Nico is at St. Orsino," Dante said. His voice had no softness left in it. "If he thinks I am dead, he will call the captains there before morning. He will need them to bow fast, before anyone hears a different story." Mara rose. "Then we move before he finishes lying." The wounded soldier made a small sound, maybe a plea, maybe a curse. Mara did not let him finish it. When she stood again, Dante did not ask what she had done. He only followed her deeper into the tunnel. The underground garage waited behind a private loading gate where Dante's armored Bentley sat under dull yellow lights. Rainwater poured through cracks in the concrete, pooling around the tires. Mara slid behind the wheel before Dante could argue. He opened his mouth, then closed it when she looked at him. "You know the city above?" she said. "I know how men chase." The gate rose just enough for the Bentley to slip through. They shot into the flooded service road beneath the city. the engine roaring against the low ceiling. Behind them, headlights appeared, then more, black harbor vehicles, dark and heavy, gaining fast through the water-slick tunnel. Dante braced one hand against the dash. "Can you outrun them?" Mara's hands tightened on the wheel. No. She hit the brakes. The first pursuing SUV slammed into the Bentley's reinforced rear with a sound like thunder trapped underground. Its hood crumpled. Its front wheels buckled. Mara accelerated again before the second vehicle could swerve. She took a hard turn, let the Bentley's weight slide, then crushed the next SUV against the tunnel wall until sparks burst bright and wild in the dark. Dante stared at her, half furious, half mesmerized. "You drive like you fight," he said. "I fight like I survive," Mara replied. By the time they surfaced near the river warehouses, the vehicles behind them were burning in the tunnels, their smoke swallowed by rain. The city looked washed and haunted. New Orleans shimmered under the storm, all iron balconies, wet brick, neon reflections, and secrets too old to die. Mara drove without asking directions, cutting through streets Dante had not used since childhood. At last, she stopped at an abandoned cold storage building near the river, a place with broken windows and a faded sign no one had bothered to remove. Inside, the building was not abandoned at all. Behind a false wall, Mara had built a safe site. Weapons, cash, forged documents, medical supplies, radios, body armor, and maps waited in clean, careful rows. Dante stepped inside slowly. He had safe houses all across the Gulf Coast, but this was different. His were built by money. Mara's was built by fear, discipline, and years of expecting every quiet night to become the last one. She pulled off the ruined kitchen uniform without ceremony, revealing dark tactical clothing beneath. The padded vest fit close across her wide chest. Her arms were thick, bruised, and powerful. Her body was not the soft joke his men had made it. It was leverage. It was weight. It was endurance. It was the reason men underestimated her, and the weapon that punished them for it. Dante looked at her for a long time. Mara noticed. "Say what you are thinking." "I am thinking," Dante said, slowly removing his blood-stained jacket, "that every man in my house who mocked you was lucky you were hiding." Mara gave a low, humorless laugh. "They were lucky I was tired." She tossed him a clean shirt, a pistol, and a black coat from a locker. "Nico will have guards." "He will have my guards," Dante said, and something cold passed through his voice. "That is worse." "No," Mara said. "It is easier. Your guards expect you to arrive with noise. They expect fear, cars, shouting, men kicking doors open. They do not expect me." The St. Orsino Club stood above the river like a memory that refused to rot. It had once been a private lounge for judges, bankers, and old families who pretended their money was clean because it had been dirty for generations. Tonight, its windows glowed amber through the rain. Inside, Nico Bellafiore stood at the head of a long table beneath a painted ceiling, wearing grief like an expensive suit. The captains sat around him, uneasy and silent. Some had blood on their cuffs from the chaos at the casino. Some looked afraid. Some looked hungry. Nico spoke softly, telling them Dante had died in an attack by rivals, that the family was exposed, that leadership could not wait until morning. He said all the right words: stability, survival, legacy, family. Lies always sounded better when wrapped in words men wanted to believe. Then the lights went out. The room fell into darkness so complete that even the rain seemed to hold its breath. A guard near the east door made a small choking sound and dropped. Another turned toward the noise and vanished backward into shadow. A suppressed shot whispered near the bar. Then another. Chairs scraped. One captain cursed. Nico shouted for emergency power, but nothing answered him except the soft, steady sound of someone moving through the dark. When the lights returned, Dante Bellafiore stood in the doorway. He was soaked with rain, bloodied at the temple, and very much alive. Behind him stood Mafia Boss. No flower, no limp, no lowered eyes. She held a rifle across her body and looked at the room as if she had already measured every breath inside it. The captains froze. Nico went pale so quickly he looked almost sick. Dante walked in slowly. No one spoke. No one reached for him. The power in the room bent around him, but this time it did not belong to him alone. It stretched toward the woman at his back, toward her calm face and steady hands, toward the terrible truth that she had walked through soldiers, tunnels, and betrayal without once asking permission to survive. "Nico," Dante said. His brother tried to smile. It died on his lips. "Dante, thank God. You thought I was dead." Nico swallowed. "We all did. I was trying to hold the family together. You sold the family." The room went colder than the storm outside. Nico's mask cracked. His eyes darted to the captains, looking for support, but found only fear. "Black Harbor wanted her," he said suddenly, pointing at Mara. "You think this is about me? They came for her. She brought this into our house. I made a deal to protect what was left." Mara did not move. Dante's expression did not change. "You gave them my codes." "I gave them a problem," Nico snapped. "You were losing control. Federal heat, missing shipments, port trouble, all of it closing in. I saw the future before you did. Black Harbor was going to take her one way or another. I made sure the family survived." "You made sure you survived," Dante said. One nervous captain reached under the table. Mara fired before his fingers touched the gun. The shot cracked into the wood, inches from his hand, sending splinters across his sleeve. He jerked back, shaking. "Palms on the table," Mara said. Her voice was quiet. Every man obeyed. Dante walked to Nico until they were close enough to share breath. For a moment, the old pain returned. Nico had been a boy in his mother's kitchen once. A scared boy with scraped hands and hungry eyes. Dante had given him a name, a room, a place at the table, and Nico had traded all of it to outsiders who burned marks into their own skin and hunted women through the world. "I trusted you with my mother's house," Dante said, "with my accounts, with my men, with my back." Nico's eyes shone with panic now. "Dante, please, we are brothers." Dante leaned close. "No, we were." The shot was quiet compared to the thunder. Nico dropped beside the chair he had planned to claim as a throne. No one moved. Dante turned to the captains. Rain streaked down the tall windows behind him. Mara stood at his side now, not behind him, and every man in the room noticed. "Nico died tonight during an attempted robbery of my casino," Dante said. "He died loyal in the story we will tell the city. Any man who disagrees with that story can follow him before sunrise." Silence answered. It was the purest oath the room could give. By dawn, the crown heron still stood. The official story moved through New Orleans before the rain even stopped. Rival gunmen had attacked the casino. Nico Bellafiore had died trying to protect the family. Dante had survived by luck, force, and the loyalty of unnamed guards. The police repeated what they were paid to repeat. The newspapers printed what they were handed. The captains bowed because they understood the new shape of the world. But in the private upper room of the St. Orsino Club, with the city waking pale and wet beyond the glass, Dante and Mara stood alone. For the first time all night, Mara looked exhausted. Not broken, just human. She leaned against the window frame, her dark clothes streaked with dust, her round face bruised near the jaw, her hands still steady, even as her eyes softened toward the river. Dante stood a few feet away, watching her with the focus of a man who had just survived death and found something more dangerous than fear. "Black Harbor knows you are here," he said. Mara nodded. "Yes. You could run. I have been running for years." And are you tired? She looked at him then. No disguise, no soft lie, no kitchen ghost. More than you know. Dante stepped closer, but not too close. Some instinct told him Mara was not a woman to be claimed by force, not if he wanted to keep the hand he reached with. Then stop running. A faint smile touched her mouth. That easy? No, Dante said. Not easy, but possible. I have ports, money, houses, men, judges, police, ships, casinos, and people who owe me their lives. You have a mind that turned my own building into a weapon, and hands that made trained soldiers afraid of the dark. Alone, they will keep hunting you. With me, we make this city a trap. Mara looked back at the river. Morning light crept over the water, grey and silver. For years, she had survived by shrinking, by changing her walk, rounding her shoulders, softening her voice, letting cruel men laugh, because laughter was safer than recognition. She had made invisibility into shelter, but shelter was still a cage when you never chose when to leave it. I will not cook for your men again, she said. Dante's mouth curved. No. I will not lower my eyes because one of your captains thinks my body gives him permission to be cruel. Any captain foolish enough to try will learn better once. I do not belong to you. The smile faded from Dante's face, but not with anger, with understanding. He stepped close enough for her to feel the warmth of him, close enough for the air between them to tighten. No, he said softly, you stand with me. Mara studied him for a long moment. He was still Dante Bellafiore, still dangerous, still the kind of man mothers warned their sons not to cross and their daughters not to trust. But he was also the first powerful man in a very long time who had seen what she was and not asked her to become smaller. He had offered not a cage, not charity, not a hiding place, but a war room. She placed her hand in his. Dante closed his fingers around hers, firm and careful, as if he understood that the woman before him was not something fragile to protect, but something rare to respect. Outside, the sun rose over New Orleans, touching the river, the rooftops, the casino towers, and the old streets where secrets slept under every stone. From that night on, Mara Voss was never again the invisible woman in the kitchen. She became the shadow commander of the Bellafiore Empire, the hidden blade behind every locked door, the quiet voice that turned the river tunnels into escape routes, the casinos into fortresses, and the old city into a maze that swallowed enemies whole. Men who once laughed at her size learned to lower their voices when she entered a room. Captains who had mocked her limp stood when she passed. And far beyond New Orleans, in the cold offices where Black Harbor gave orders and burned symbols into skin, people began whispering her name with the kind of fear usually reserved for ghosts. Dante remained the most feared mafia boss on the Gulf Coast, but he was no longer the only monster in his kingdom. Beside him stood a woman the world had dismissed as too heavy, too quiet, too plain, too slow, too easy to ignore. They had mistaken her softness for weakness. They had mistaken her silence for surrender. They had mistaken her invisibility for emptiness. And by the time they finally saw Mara Voss clearly, it was already too late. The kitchen ghost had become the queen of the dark beneath the city. At Gate 12, while the hurricane bent the palm trees outside the old ferry terminal and pushed black water over the harbor wall, Mara Bell sat between a broken vending machine and a row of sleeping strangers, with blood drying beneath the sleeve of her sweater, a flash drive hidden in her shoe, and the quiet, terrible knowledge that the man hunting her would sound more believable than she ever could. She had run through flooded streets with no coat, no money, no phone that worked, and no plan beyond reaching the emergency ferry before the city closed itself off from the storm. But the ferry was gone. The dock was empty. The water beyond the glass doors was rising in dark, restless waves. And somewhere behind her, closer than she wanted to imagine, Evan Rusk was coming to take back what she had stolen from him. Not jewelry, not cash, not some small secret a desperate woman could be blamed for inventing. Mara had stolen numbers, hidden payments, names, dates, transfers buried beneath clean company language. Proof that Blackwell Strategic Protection, the most trusted private security corporation in Port Mercy, was washing dirty money through the harbor and buying men in city offices like they were office supplies. And now, with the storm shutting every road and the terminal filled with frightened travelers, Mara realized the worst thing about escaping an abuser was not the running. It was reaching the door and finding out the world outside could still be locked. Mara had not always moved like someone trying not to be noticed. There had been a time, years before Evan, when she sat at a small desk in the back room of a shipping office and balanced accounts faster than her manager could enter them into the computer. Numbers made sense to her. They lined up. They told the truth even when people did not. A missing dollar, a repeated invoice, a payment sent on a strange date. All of it left a trail if a person knew how to look without blinking. Mara had that gift. She could remember strings of numbers after seeing them once. She could spot a fake expense buried in a stack of real ones. She could hold an entire month of payroll in her mind and know exactly where the mistake began. Back then, she wore bright cardigans, packed her own lunch, laughed with the woman at the front desk, and believed that a quiet life could still belong fully to her. Then Evan Rusk walked in one afternoon wearing a police uniform, smiling like a man who already knew how the room would answer him. He was polite at first, patient, protective. He said he liked that she was different from other women, softer, kinder, not always trying to prove something. Mara, who had spent most of her life feeling a little too large for narrow chairs and smaller expectations, wanted to believe him. By the time she understood that Evan's kindness had been a locked room with the door still open, she was already inside it. He left the police force and took a job with Blackwell, but the habits of authority stayed on him like a second skin. He decided what she wore because he said certain clothes made people stare. He handled her money because he said she was careless with it. He checked her phone because he said secrets ruined relationships. He measured the food in the house with cruel little comments that sounded like concern if someone heard them from another room. He told her that strangers laughed at her size, that her co-workers only tolerated her, that no man would ever want the work of loving her unless he was saintly or stupid. He never shouted in public. That was part of the trap. In front of other people, Evan was calm, reasonable, steady, the kind of man who held doors and remembered names. At home, his voice could turn a warm kitchen into a place where Mara forgot how to breathe. The strange thing was that he still needed her. That was the secret Evan hated most. Blackwell employed him because he knew how to intimidate people with a friendly face, but he was not good with numbers, not the way Mara was. At first, he asked for help with invoices, then corrections, then private files he said were too boring for anyone else to understand. He sat beside her at the dining table late at night, while rain tapped the windows and made her move money through accounts that were not supposed to be connected. When she asked questions, he kissed the top of her head and told her not to worry her pretty little mind. When she asked again, he stopped kissing her. After that, Mara learned to work in silence. She told herself that if she did what he wanted, he would stay calm. If he stayed calm, the house would stay safe. If the house stayed safe, maybe she could survive another day without giving him any reason to remind her how helpless she was. But numbers did not lie just because Evan did. One night, while correcting a set of invoices for emergency dock security, Mara noticed 3 payments that had been split too neatly. The amounts were different, but the timing was too perfect, tucked under routine repairs and storm preparation fees. She followed one account into another, then another after that, her heart beating harder with every new page. Blackwell was not only stealing, it was building something. There were payments to city officials, false equipment rentals, money moving through shell companies with names that sounded harmless enough to put on a charity form. There were notes about Port Mercy's shipping terminals, about security failures that had not happened yet, about contracts that would only become valuable if the city believed the harbor was out of control. Mara sat frozen in the blue light of the laptop, one hand pressed to her mouth, understanding that she had been helping Evan hide a machine built to swallow the whole port. She copied what she could. She did not plan it like a brave woman in a movie. Her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the flash drive twice. She saved files under names that meant nothing. She moved quietly, because Evan was asleep in the bedroom. And even asleep, he seemed to listen for disobedience. Outside, the first edge of the hurricane had reached the city, rattling the shutters and dragging trash cans across the alley. The weather alerts on the muted television flashed red again and again. Mara watched the progress bar crawl across the screen, each second too slow, each sound from the bedroom too loud. When the copy finally finished, she pulled the drive free and closed the laptop with careful hands. She had just pushed the tiny piece of plastic deep into her shoe when the hallway light came on. Evan stood there in sweatpants and a white t-shirt, his hair mussed, his face calm in a way that made her stomach drop. He did not ask what she was doing. He looked at the laptop, then at her shoes, then at her face. For a moment, the storm outside was the only thing that moved. Mara tried to say his name, but it came out as air. Evan crossed the room slowly, like a man approaching a stray dog he meant to leash. He told her she was confused. He told her she had been tired. He told her that whatever she thought she saw, she had misunderstood it, because she was not built for serious things. When he reached for her, something inside Mara finally refused to fold. Not courage, exactly. Something older. Something tired of being made small. She grabbed the heavy desk lamp beside the laptop and swung it with both hands. The sound it made when it struck him was dull and shocking. Evan staggered back, more surprised than hurt at first, and that surprise gave Mara the only opening she was going to get. She ran barefoot through the back door with one shoe half on and the other clutched in her hand, rain hitting her face so hard she could barely see. She did not take a coat. She did not take a bag. Her phone slipped from her hand somewhere near the alley and vanished into rushing water. Behind her, Evan shouted her name, not like a husband afraid for his wife, but like an owner calling after stolen property. Mara kept moving. She pushed through streets already filling at the curbs, past shuttered restaurants and dark traffic lights, past cars trapped in water up to their tires. The city had become strange under the storm, familiar buildings blurred into shapes, sirens fading in and out like distant animals. Once, a police cruiser rolled slowly past an intersection, and Mara ducked behind a bus shelter until it disappeared. She knew what Evan would say. He had said it before in practice, in warning, in jokes that were never jokes. Who do you think they'll believe, Mara? You, looking like that, or me? By the time she reached the old ferry terminal near the harbor, her lungs burned and her side ached. The building looked half abandoned, all cracked tile and faded signs, but light still glowed inside. People had gathered there after the evacuation notices, families with plastic bags, elderly couples wrapped in beach towels, a mother holding a sleeping child against her chest. Mara stumbled through the doors and searched for the line to the ferry, only to hear someone say the last boat had left 15 minutes earlier. 15 minutes. The words struck harder than the rain. She stood still beneath the flickering lights, water dripping from her hair onto the floor, and felt the last thin thread of her plan snap cleanly in two. She found a place near gate 12 because it was dimmer there, and because a broken vending machine gave her something to hide beside. Nobody looked at her for very long. That was usually what Mara wanted. Tonight, it felt like a mercy and a danger at the same time. She pulled her knees close, though it hurt, and tried to keep her breathing quiet. The flash drive pressed against the sole of her foot. It felt impossible that something so small could carry enough truth to get her killed. Across the terminal, rain blurred the glass doors until the outside world looked underwater. A few men in dark jackets stood near the old ticket counter, too still to be ordinary travelers. One of them was broad-shouldered and calm, with a white linen shirt open at the throat, beneath a dark jacket that looked too expensive for a storm shelter. His hair was black, his beard trimmed close, his skin warm brown under the harsh lights. People kept glancing at him and then quickly looking away. Not because he made noise, he did not need to. The quiet around him seemed to belong to him. Mara did not know his name yet, but half the room did. Rafael Navarro, Rafe, to the men who worked the docks and the women who lowered their voices when he passed. Born in Florida, raised near these same waters, feared from the warehouse district to the trucking yards beyond the bridge. Some said he owned half of Port Mercy through clean companies. Others said the other half listened when he spoke, because it knew better than to argue. He was not a good man in the simple way bedtime stories preferred good men to be. There were shadows around him, old debts, darker rumors, names people did not say twice. But even from across the terminal, Mara could tell one thing with a strange certainty. He was dangerous without being loud. Evan used silence to wait for the moment he could hurt her. This man used silence like a wall no one foolish would try to climb. The doors at the front of the terminal opened with a violent gust of rain. Mara knew before she looked. Her body knew first. It went cold, then hollow. Evan stepped inside wearing a Blackwell rain jacket, his forehead bandaged where the lamp had struck him. 2 security officers came in behind him, clean, armed, professional. Evan scanned the terminal with worried eyes, playing the part so well that a woman near the entrance touched his arm and pointed toward the gates. Mara tried to shrink behind the vending machine, but there was nowhere left to go. Evan saw her. His face softened in public sympathy, and that was worse than rage. He came toward her slowly, palms half raised, voice gentle enough for everyone nearby to hear. He called her sweetheart. He said she was sick. He said she had stolen confidential files during a breakdown and hurt herself running from people trying to help. The nearest travelers stared at Mara's wet clothes, her shaking hands, the bruise rising near her cheek, and she watched belief move across their faces in the wrong direction. Evan looked steady. Mara looked terrified. In the world they lived in, that was often enough to decide the truth. When he reached for her wrist, Mara flinched so hard, her shoulder hit the vending machine. The sound made several people turn. Evan's fingers closed around her anyway, not tight enough to look cruel, tight enough to remind her. Then another hand caught Evan's arm before he could pull her up. Rafe Navarro stood between them, as if he had always been there. Up close, he was taller than Mara expected, not in a showy way, but in a way that made space rearrange itself around him. His eyes did not move from Evan's face. His voice, when he spoke, was low and even, almost relaxed. He said the woman had come to him on her own. He said she would leave only if she chose to leave. Not if Evan ordered it, not if Blackwell demanded it, not if two armed men in matching jackets tried to make the room believe fear was proof of guilt. Evan's polite mask cracked for one small second. It was quick, but Mara saw it, and so did Rafe. Evan began to say something sharp, something official, something about stolen property and lawful recovery. Then one of the Blackwell officers leaned close and whispered in his ear. Evan's face changed. Recognition entered his eyes like a door shutting. He knew exactly who Rafe was. Everyone near Gate 12 seemed to feel it at once. The shift in the air, the quiet fear moving from one man to another. Rafe did not threaten him. Somehow that made it worse. He only stood there, patient and still, while the storm pressed rain against the roof and the terminal lights hummed overhead. Evan released Mara's wrist slowly. His gaze slid to her, and for a moment she saw the promise beneath his calm. This was not over. He even said it softly, that she would come home eventually, because women like her always came back when they realized the world was too hard. Then he stepped away with the Blackwell officers, walking backward for the first few steps, as if he could not bear to turn his back on what he considered his. Mara remained against the vending machine, shaking so deeply she could feel it in her teeth. She waited for Rafe to tell her what would happen next. Men always did. Evan had. Doctors had. Police officers had. Bank clerks had. Everyone had an idea of what Mara should do, where she should go, what she should accept, how grateful she should be. But Rafe only looked at her with a seriousness that did not soften into pity. He asked if she wanted to go with Evan. Mara stared at him, unable to answer. Then he asked if she wanted to stay in the terminal. She looked toward the flooded doors, the stranded travelers, the Blackwell men waiting outside under the awning. Finally, he asked if she wanted to leave under his protection, and he said the last word carefully, like it was something that could become dangerous if handled wrong. For the first time in 6 years, nobody filled the silence for her. Nobody grabbed her arm. Nobody told her what she felt. Nobody called her confused. The storm roared over the harbor, and Mara Bell, bleeding, soaked, terrified, and still carrying the truth in her shoe, understood that freedom did not always arrive as a wide-open road. Sometimes it arrived as a question asked by a dangerous man who was willing to accept the answer. Mara looked at Evan beyond the glass, then at the dark water swallowing the edge of the dock, then at Rafe Navarro, who had stepped back just enough to leave room between them. Her voice was small when it came, but it was hers. She chose Rafe. She chose Rafe, but choosing him did not feel like walking into safety. It felt like stepping from one storm into another, only this time the hand nearest to her did not close around her wrist. Rafe did not touch her as he led her through the side exit of the ferry terminal, past the old ticket windows, and the families huddled beneath leaking ceiling tiles, past the Blackwell men pretending not to watch from the edge of the glass doors. He walked a few steps ahead, never so far that she felt abandoned, never so close that she felt trapped. Outside, the hurricane had turned the harbor road into a shining black river, and two dark SUVs waited beneath the broken shelter of the loading lane. Men with earpieces stood beside them, their coats whipped hard by the wind, but none of them looked at Mara like she was a problem to be solved. They looked at Rafe, waited for his smallest nod, and made room. All the way through the flooded streets of Port Mercy, Mara sat in the back of the SUV, with both hands folded around the shoe that held the flash drive. She expected questions. She expected demands. She expected Rafe to ask what she had stolen and why Evan had chased her through a hurricane with armed men behind him. Instead, Rafe passed her a clean towel without looking at her too long and told the driver to take the quiet route. The city outside the tinted glass flickered in and out of power, whole blocks going dark while traffic lights swung uselessly over empty intersections. Palm trees bent like they were trying to escape their own roots. Somewhere in the distance, a transformer burst blue against the rain. Mara watched it all with numb eyes and wondered whether freedom always began with this much fear. The Maravilla rose at the edge of the old hotel district, a restored Art Deco tower glowing gold against the storm, its curved balconies and green glass windows looking almost unreal through the rain. Long ago, tourists had come there for music and sea air. Now, most people in Port Mercy knew better than to walk through its doors without an invitation. Rafe owned it through a hospitality company that sounded harmless on paper, but Mara saw the cameras tucked into the brass lamps, the guards near the service hall, the way every employee straightened when he entered. Still, the lobby was warm. That was the first thing she noticed. Warm light, warm air, the smell of coffee and polished wood, the soft echo of rain beating against high windows. After so many hours of cold, the warmth made her knees weaken. A doctor cleaned the cut on her arm and examined the bruises blooming along her shoulder. A woman with silver hair and kind, direct eyes introduced herself as a lawyer and explained that nobody in this building had the right to make decisions for Mara. Another woman, a counselor, did not ask Mara to tell the whole story at once. She only asked whether Mara wanted the door open or closed while they spoke. It was such a small question that Mara almost cried from the weight of it. Rafe stayed in the hall. He did not enter until Mara said he could. Even then, he remained near the doorway, hands loose at his sides, dark eyes calm and unreadable. He told her that Evan had destroyed her identification, but that could be replaced legally. He told her Blackwell had frozen the account Evan controlled, but there were unpaid wages and stolen earnings that could be recovered into a temporary account under her name. He did not offer her a new identity. He did not offer her a secret life. He offered paperwork, witnesses, lawyers, doors that opened from the inside, and guards who had already been told that if she wanted to leave, no one would stop her. That frightened Mara more than a locked room would have. She understood locked rooms. She understood rules. She understood the shape of a kindness that later became a bill. So, again and again, she asked what Rafe wanted. The first time he said nothing. The second time, he looked at her for so long she thought he might finally reveal the price. But all he said was that safety bought with obedience was just another cage with cleaner sheets. He told her she could sleep, or call the lawyer, or walk out through the lobby and disappear into the rain if that was what she chose. Then he left her alone. Mara sat on the edge of the wide hotel bed in borrowed clothes, staring at the door no one had locked, and realized she did not know how to rest inside a room she was allowed to leave. For the first few days, she planned her escape from Rafe as carefully as she had once planned her escape from Evan. She memorized the exits, the stairwells, the shift changes in the lobby. She hid the flash drive in different places every night. She ate only when no one was looking and slept with the lamp on. But Blackwell was moving faster than her fear. Evan had reported her as unstable and dangerous. Her face appeared in internal alerts sent to hospitals, shelters, and bus stations. Blackwell men asked questions in places desperate women usually went when they had nowhere left. And the records Mara had carried out in her shoe proved something far worse than theft. Blackwell was not simply laundering money through the port. It was preparing to create violence, then sell the city the cure. A few staged attacks, a few bought officials, a few frightened headlines. Then Port Mercy would hand its terminals to the same corporation that had helped break them. When Rafe's own accountant dismissed her concerns as panic dressed up as math, Mara asked for access to the ledgers. The room went quiet. Men who had carried guns through dock wars looked at her as if she had asked to command a ship through a hurricane. Rafe did not smile. He only turned the laptop toward her. Mara sat down with wet hair still drying against her borrowed sweater and began to read. For hours, she said almost nothing. She followed payments through vendors and maintenance crews, through fuel accounts and warehouse repairs, through clean numbers that had been polished too well. Near dawn, she found it. Security schedules had been sold from inside Rafe's own operation. An old employee with access to the maintenance tunnels had been feeding Blackwell entry routes and guard rotations. There was an attack planned for that morning, not at the docks, but near the hotel garage where Rafe's lieutenant always arrived before sunrise. Mara looked up from the screen and said the man's name. The assassination failed because Mara saw the pattern before the bullets arrived. After that, no one in the Maravilla looked at her as a frightened woman Rafe had pulled from Gate 12. They looked at her as someone whose mind could catch what their weapons could not. Rafe offered her a job inside the legitimate shipping company, reviewing accounts and mapping risks. Mara said no at first. Then she said she would consider it. Then, with her hands shaking beneath the table, she named her salary, her hours, her right to quit, her right to say no to any work that crossed a line she could not live with. Rafe listened to every term. When she finished, he said yes to all of them. That yes did more for Mara than any expensive gift could have done. It was the first money in years she had not had to beg for, hide, or hand over. Weeks passed, in the strange quiet between storms. Mara began therapy in a room overlooking the sea. She learned that flinching was not foolish. She learned that hunger could be fear wearing another face. She learned to eat breakfast at a table where nobody counted what was on her plate. One morning, the counselor asked her to wear something that belonged only to her, not something chosen to hide inside. Mara bought a yellow dress from a small shop 3 blocks from the hotel and nearly left it at the register because she could hear Evan's old voice laughing in her head. When she finally walked through the Maravilla lobby wearing it, her whole body braced for judgment. Rafe looked up from a call, went still for one quiet second, and then looked back into her eyes, instead of letting his gaze take what she had not offered. He told her the color suited her, and returned to his conversation. Mara had to steady herself against the front desk, not because the compliment was grand, but because it was simple. It did not ask her to shrink. It did not ask her to perform gratitude. It just let her exist. Rafe taught her things too, but never the way Evan had taught lessons. He taught her how to notice exits without living in fear of them, how to drive through flooded streets without panicking when water hit the tires, how to turn her body instead of pulling straight back when someone grabbed her wrist. He did not talk about making her smaller or faster or harder. He told her that strength was not always sharp. Sometimes strength was weight, balance, patience, the refusal to be moved before she chose to move. The first time she knocked one of his larger guards off balance during practice, Mara stared down at him in stunned silence. Then she laughed. It came out broken and surprised, but it was real. Rafe, standing nearby with his arms crossed, looked at her, as if that laugh had done more damage to him than any bullet ever could. Their closeness grew slowly, like light entering a room through a curtain someone was afraid to open all the way. Rafe told her about his father, a violent man who believed fear was the only loyalty that lasted. He told her how he had built his own empire trying to escape that shadow, and feared he had only made the shadow larger. Mara did not comfort him with pretty lies. She told him the truth. Power could protect, but it could also become a hand around someone's throat if the person holding it forgot to ask. Rafe listened. For a while, that was enough. Then Evan called. He offered Rafe information about Blackwell in exchange for Mara. Rafe refused. But before Mara could speak for herself, before she could decide what risk she was willing to take, Rafe had Evan found, beaten, and ordered out of the city. When Mara learned what he had done, the old fear came back so fast she could taste metal. She did not defend Evan. She did not pity him. She stood in Rafe's office with both hands trembling and told him that making a decision about her life without her was still control, even if he called it protection. Rafe did not shout. He did not defend himself. He looked at her as if the words had landed exactly where they needed to. Then he apologized. No excuses, no softening, no turning his guilt into another burden for her to carry. From that day forward, he brought her into the room before decisions were made. But Evan had survived, and whatever small part of him once wanted Mara back had hardened into something uglier. He joined Blackwell completely and gave them everything he knew. The hotel layout, the names of Rafe's people, the service tunnels beneath the Mara Villa. Most of all, he told them what Mara had become inside that place. Not a hostage, not a guest, a weakness with a mind full of evidence. When the hurricane's second landfall struck Port Mercy, the city went black all at once. The Mara Villa's lights flickered, died, and returned in a dim red glow. Then the first shots echoed from below. Armed contractors came through the maintenance tunnels, while wind screamed against the tower windows. A traitor inside the hotel disabled half the security system and tried to steer everyone upward toward the roof, where helicopters would have been useless in the storm, but panic would make people obey. Mara saw the mistake in the movement before anyone else did. The attackers were not pushing toward Rafe. They were pushing toward her. They wanted the flash drive, the records, the woman who could explain them. While Rafe's men fought through smoke and emergency lights, Mara studied the old building plans she had memorized during her first week of suspicion and found a service passage leading toward the harbor. She helped kitchen workers, maids, desk clerks, and wounded guards move through the narrow passage one by one, her voice steady, even when the walls shook. Then she saw Evan, with a gun pressed to the side of Rafe's wounded lieutenant. For one terrible second, the world narrowed to the man she had run from, and the people still trying to escape behind her. Evan smiled when he saw her. He called her by the old soft name he used when he wanted strangers to think he loved her. Mara understood what he wanted. If she hid, he would keep taking hostages. If she stepped out, he would follow, so she stepped into the open and let him see her. He chased her through rain and broken glass, out of the wounded hotel and back toward the harbor, where everything had begun. The ferry terminal stood dark except for emergency lights glowing red over Gate 12. Floodwater rushed across the floor in thin, dirty waves. Evan cornered her near the same broken vending machine where she had once hidden with the flash drive in her shoe. He told her this proved everything, that she could not survive without a powerful man, that she had only traded one owner for another, that she would always need someone bigger than her to decide where she belonged. And Mara, shaking, soaked, terrified, finally understood the difference. Evan had needed her weak so he could feel strong. Rafe had helped her become strong enough to leave him if she chose. That truth moved through her like warmth in the deepest part of winter. When Evan grabbed her, she did not overpower him like a hero in a story. She fought like a woman who wanted to live. She turned her wrist the way she had practiced. She used her weight, her hip, the slick floor. The edge of the vending machine, she fell hard, got up, slipped again, and kept moving. When Evan raised his gun, Rafe's voice cut through the terminal from behind him, low and deadly, giving him one chance to put it down. Evan fired at Mara instead. Rafe fired once. The sound vanished into the roar of the storm. Evan's death ended the house Mara had been trapped in, but it did not end the war. Blackwell used the chaos to blame Rafe's organization for the violence, and moved to take control of the port under an emergency contract signed before the city even counted the wounded. Rafe wanted to send Mara away. Mara refused. She did not want a gun. She did not want revenge dressed up as romance. She wanted the numbers. So she built a map of every shell company, every bribe, every secret account, every clean name hiding dirty money. By the time the storm began to weaken, she had found the final move. Blackwell's leaders were transferring their records and command staff onto a cargo ship before federal investigators could get close. Rafe and Mara planned the operation together. His people would seize the ship. Mara would send the records to journalists and federal authorities at the same time, so no port official could bury them quietly. But storms have a way of changing every plan made by people who think they control the world. Below deck, Blackwell's leader trapped Rafe behind sealed doors and began flooding the lower compartments, planning to sink the evidence, the ship, and the man who had challenged him. Mara had a clear path out. For one moment, the old voice of survival told her to run while the door was open. Then she remembered Gate 12. She remembered a man asking instead of taking. She turned back. She did not save Rafe because she had become fearless. She was afraid the entire time. Her hands slipped on wet metal, her lungs burned from smoke. Water climbed past her ankles, then her calves, as she followed emergency diagrams and opened sealed compartments one by one. She redirected the flooding just enough to reach him before the lower deck filled. When Rafe saw her through the rising water, his face changed in a way no one else would have recognized. Not surprise, not pride. Fear, because she had chosen danger freely, and love, because he knew he had no right to command her away from it. Together they escaped into the storm just as the evidence transmitted, and by dawn, the Coast Guard surrounded the ship. Blackwell's leaders were arrested. Their political allies woke to their own names on every screen in the city. Afterward, Port Mercy did not become clean overnight. Cities never do. Men like Rafe did not wash blood from their hands with one good decision, but he began the slow, painful work of changing what he controlled: the docks, the warehouses, the trucking routes, the emergency supply lines. All the pieces of his empire that had once carried fear began turning toward legitimate shipping and disaster relief. Some men left him, some enemies circled. Some nights, the past came knocking hard enough to rattle every window. But Rafe kept choosing the harder future, because Mara had taught him that love, built on fear, was only another kind of prison. Mara built something too. With recovered Blackwell money and accounts no longer hidden behind lies, she opened Harbor House inside the renovated ferry terminal. The same place where she had once believed she had nowhere left to run became a place where women could arrive with no purse, no phone, no papers, and still be believed. Harbor House gave them rooms with locks they controlled, lawyers who explained instead of commanded, counselors who knew silence was sometimes the first language of survival, and bank accounts no abuser could empty in the middle of the night. Mara hired people who understood that rescue was not the same as freedom. Rescue pulled someone out of the storm. Freedom gave her the map, the keys, the money, the truth, and the right to decide what happened next. Years later, another storm came through Port Mercy, not as violent as the one that had changed Mara's life, but strong enough to push rain against the windows of the old terminal and make the harbor smell like salt and memory. Gate 12 no longer had faded signs and broken machines. It had warm lights, clean chairs, a children's corner, offices with soft doors, and a small brass plaque near the entrance that read, Harbor House. Mara sat in the intake room wearing a blue dress Evan would have hated and a ring Rafe had given her, only after she had her own home, her own work, her own money, and the full, steady knowledge that she could say no. When he proposed, he had not promised to protect her forever. He had promised to tell her the truth, respect her choices, and stand beside her when she chose to fight her own battles. That night, a frightened woman arrived at Gate 12 with wet hair, shaking hands, and a story she could barely speak. She kept saying nobody would believe her. Mara sat beside her, not across from her, and did not rush the words. Outside the glass doors, Rafe waited under the awning, hands in his pockets, rain silvering his dark hair. He did not enter. He did not interrupt. He understood that this moment belonged to Mara. Inside, Mara gently told the woman that she did not have to make every decision tonight. She did not have to explain everything perfectly. She did not have to prove she was worth saving before someone opened a door. She only had to make the first choice. The woman looked toward the exit, then back at Mara, and for a moment, Mara saw herself as she had been years ago, soaked and bleeding beside a broken vending machine, certain that invisibility was the closest thing to safety she would ever know. But she was not that woman anymore. She was seen. She was respected. She was powerful, not because a feared man had chosen her, not because danger had loved her gently, and not because the world had suddenly become kind. Mara Bell was powerful because, on the worst night of her life, when the storm had taken every road and every lie had been louder than the truth, someone had finally given her a choice. And this time, when she reached for the trembling woman's hand, Mara did not pull. She waited. Because freedom, she had learned, was not the hand that dragged you out of the dark. It was the open door, the steady light, and the voice that said you could walk through when you were ready. The night New Orleans went dark, nobody expected a laundromat owner with tired feet, empty pockets, and a heart too soft for her own survival to become the one woman a mafia king would never forget. The summer heat had already turned the city mean before the blackout came. It pressed against windows, crawled under doors, stuck to the skin, and made every breath feel stolen. Then the power died across whole blocks at once, swallowing streetlights, traffic signals, porch lamps, bar signs, and the golden glow of expensive riverfront hotels, until the city looked like something ancient had opened its mouth and breathed over it. Somewhere near the Mississippi River, a private charity boat drifted without power, smoke curling from its lower deck like a warning from another world. People screamed. Rich men shouted into dead phones. Women stumbled in jeweled shoes. And, behind a locked service gate, a little girl beat one weak hand against the metal, trapped where nobody important could see her. Everyone heard the panic, everyone saw the smoke, but only Clara Voss moved. Clara had been closing the last dryer at Voss Family Laundry when the lights cut out. The old machines groaned to a stop one by one, like exhausted animals giving up. For a moment, the building became so still she could hear the water dripping from a cracked pipe behind the washroom wall. Then the neighborhood outside erupted into noise. Car horns, distant sirens, people calling from balconies. Somewhere down the street, a man laughed too loudly, the kind of laugh people used when fear was sitting too close. Clara stood in the middle of the laundromat, with a basket of warm towels pressed against her wide hip, and sweat sliding down the back of her neck. She was 32 years old, fat, worn out, and so used to fixing things alone that the darkness did not scare her as much as the electric bill waiting in the office drawer. The laundromat had belonged to her father, before it belonged to her. He had painted the sign himself, in soft blue letters that had faded under years of Louisiana sun. When Clara was little, she used to sit on top of the folding tables with a sketchbook balanced on her knees, drawing velvet gowns, feathered masks, wedding dresses, carnival costumes, and impossible coats with shining buttons. Her father would laugh and tell customers that one day his girl would dress movie stars or queens, whichever paid better. Clara had believed him then. She had believed in fabric, in color, in the magic of turning plain cloth into something that made a person stand taller. Then her father died suddenly, and not long after, her younger brother Milo was left paralyzed in an accident that split their lives into before and after. Dreams became unpaid invoices. Sketchbooks became appointment logs. Satin became bleach-stained work shirts. Clara learned how to argue with insurance companies, repair jammed dryers, stretch rice and beans across a week, and smile politely when customers handed her ruined clothes at closing time and expected miracles by morning. She did not think of herself as tragic. She did not have time for that. She was simply tired in the way people became tired when they were needed too much. Her body ached from standing all day. Her hands smelled of detergent no matter how hard she washed them. Her dark hair was twisted into a messy bun, and her cotton dress clung to the soft rolls of her stomach and thighs. Men rarely looked at Clara unless they wanted help lifting something. Women with sharp smiles sometimes spoke to her in that sweet, careful voice people used when they thought kindness and pity were the same thing. She had spent most of her life being treated like furniture in a room everyone used but nobody noticed. She was useful. She was dependable. She was easy to take for granted. That night, after the power failed, Clara locked the cash drawer, checked the back door, and called Milo. The signal was weak, but his voice came through with its usual dry humor. He told her the apartment was hot enough to roast a chicken, and that if the power did not come back soon, he planned to move into the freezer aisle at the corner store. Clara smiled despite herself, and promised she would be home soon with ice, if any store still had some. She picked up her bag, tucked her keys between her fingers the way women did when walking alone at night, and stepped out into the thick dark of the city. The streets were strange without light. New Orleans did not become quiet. It never did. Even in darkness it hummed. People gathered outside bars where the music had died but the drinking had not. Old men sat on stoops fanning themselves with paper plates. Dogs barked at shadows. The air smelled of river mud, hot brick, spilled beer, and rain that had not yet decided whether to fall. Clara walked toward the river because the main avenue was blocked by traffic, and the breeze near the water, even a dirty, warm breeze, was better than nothing. She was thinking about Milo's medication schedule, the broken washer in the back row, and the landlord's latest threat to raise the rent when the first scream cut across the waterfront. Clara stopped. At first, she saw only shapes. A riverboat, too elegant for ordinary people, sat crooked against the dock, its strings of decorative lights dead. Smoke poured from one side of the lower deck and rolled across the gangway. People were pushing toward the exit in a glittering rush of panic, their formal clothes flashing in the emergency glow of a few battery lanterns. Someone shouted that the engine room had blown. Someone else screamed for security. A man in a tuxedo stumbled past Clara, coughing hard, one sleeve burned at the cuff. No one seemed to know who was in charge. No one seemed to know who was still inside. Clara should have kept walking. That was what a sensible person would have done. She was not a firefighter. She was not young and fast. She had Milo waiting at home, and if something happened to her, there was no one left to hold their tiny world together. She told herself all of that in the space of one breath. Then she saw the child. The little girl was below the main deck, behind a service gate near the shadowed stairwell. She was small, maybe 8 years old, wearing a pale dress, now smeared with soot. One hand clutched the bars. Her face was turned toward the dock, but her cries were thin and broken, nearly swallowed by the chaos above her. A crew member ran past the stairwell and did not see her. A woman on the dock pointed and screamed, but she did not move closer. The smoke thickened. The girl's knees buckled. Clara's body moved before fear could finish its argument. She dropped her bag on the dock and pushed through the crowd. Someone grabbed her arm and told her not to go in. Clara shook him off so hard he stumbled. The gangway shifted under her weight, slick with river mist and spilled champagne. Heat rolled out of the boat in heavy waves. Inside, the air was black and sour. Clara pulled the collar of her dress over her nose and coughed as her eyes burned. The emergency lights flickered weakly along the walls, turning everything red and ghostly. She could hear the child again, closer now, coughing more than crying. The service gate was locked with a heavy chain. Clara pulled at it once, twice, uselessly. Her palms slipped with sweat. She looked around and saw a fire axe behind cracked glass on the wall. For one wild second, she remembered being 12 years old in the laundromat, using scissors too big for her hands to cut cloth for a costume she had never finished. Then she smashed the glass with her elbow, grabbed the axe, and swung. The first strike sent pain roaring up her arms. The second knocked the chain loose but did not break it. Smoke crawled lower, filling her lungs. Clara planted her feet, felt the full weight of her body settle beneath her, and swung again with everything grief, debt, exhaustion, and love had built inside her. The chain snapped. The gate lurched open. The little girl collapsed into her arms. Clara caught her against her chest, shocked by how light she was. The child's skin was hot. Her breathing sounded wrong, soft and wet and fading. Clara's fear sharpened into something colder. She had sat beside Milo in hospitals. She knew the sound of breath becoming work. She dropped the axe, lifted the girl, and turned toward the way she had come. But a crash above them shook the stairwell. Something heavy fell across the passage, throwing sparks into the smoke. People screamed from the main deck. The way out was blocked. For a moment, Clara stood in the dark with the child's face pressed against her shoulder and felt the terrible truth of it. No one was coming fast enough. She forced herself to think. Laundromats taught a person things rich people never noticed. Service doors, maintenance passages, vents, back routes meant for workers, not guests. Clara spotted a narrow corridor marked for crew only and pushed into it sideways, clutching the girl tight. The passage was barely wide enough. Her hip scraped against metal. Her shoulder hit a pipe. She whispered to the child the whole time, though she did not know if the girl could hear her. "Stay with me, baby. Breathe when I breathe. Just a little longer. I have you. I have you." The boat moaned around them. Somewhere below, machinery popped and hissed. Clara kept moving. Her lungs burned so badly that black spots swam in her vision, but she did not stop. When the girl stopped coughing, Clara panicked and shifted her higher, pressing 2 fingers beneath her jaw the way she had seen nurses do. There was still a pulse, weak but there. Clara began to hum without realizing it, an old lullaby her father used to sing while sweeping the laundromat after closing. Her voice came out rough and broken, but the rhythm steadied her steps. At the end of the passage, a maintenance door was jammed. Clara kicked it once. Pain shot through her foot. She kicked again, sobbing with effort. The door gave way, and humid night air rushed over her face like mercy. She stumbled out onto a lower platform near the dock, holding the girl so tightly that her arms trembled. A paramedic saw them and shouted. Hands reached for the child, but Clara did not let go until someone with a medical bag looked her in the eye and said they had her. Only then did Clara step back. The dock blurred. Sirens howled closer. People crowded around, asking questions she could not answer. Someone tried to put a blanket over her shoulders. She pushed it away. Her throat felt scraped raw. Her dress was torn. Her arm was bleeding from the broken glass, and soot covered her face. She looked once at the little girl, now surrounded by paramedics, an oxygen mask pressed gently over her nose and mouth. The girl's hand moved weakly, reaching for something. Maybe her, maybe no one. Clara's heart twisted. Then she heard a man shouting a name, Leora. The name rolled across the dock with such fear inside it that Clara turned. A black SUV had stopped beyond the police barrier. Men in dark clothes moved around it with the hard, silent speed of trained violence. And through them came a man who made the entire waterfront seem to pull back. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearms. His dark hair was disordered, like he had touched it too many times on the way there. His face was beautiful in a severe, dangerous way, but his eyes were not cold then. They were wild. They searched the smoke, the stretchers, the crowd, and then locked on the little girl. Clara knew before anyone said it. This was her father. She watched him drop to his knees beside the stretcher. She saw the way his hand shook as he touched the child's hair. She heard his voice lower into something broken and tender. The sight hurt more than the smoke in her lungs. It made her think of her own father, of Milo in the hospital bed, of how love could turn even strong people helpless. Clara stepped backward, suddenly aware of her body, her torn dress, her dirty face, the blood on her arm, the crowd, the questions waiting to trap her there. She had not done this for attention. She had not done it for money. She had done it because a child was alone in the dark. So while everyone looked at the man and the child, Clara slipped away. By morning, the city knew Roman Kane's daughter had survived the riverboat fire. The news anchors spoke carefully, because even people who pretended not to know his name still knew enough to fear it. Roman Kane owned shipping companies, hotels, casinos, warehouses, and pieces of the city that never appeared on paper. Men who crossed him tended to lose businesses, freedom, or blood. But he had also funded hospitals, repaired schools, paid funeral costs for strangers, and kept whole neighborhoods alive through favors nobody could prove. In New Orleans, his name was both a warning and a prayer. Roman did not care what the city said. He sat beside Leora's hospital bed and watched the rise and fall of her chest, like his own life depended on it. Her small hand rested inside his. There was soot beneath one of her fingernails that the nurses had missed. Every time he saw it, something ancient and violent moved inside him. Someone had tried to kill his daughter. Not scare him, not send a message, kill her. His security chief, Thomas Rook, stood near the door, quiet as stone. Thomas had already confirmed the fire was no accident. A secondary power unit had been damaged before the boat left the dock. Emergency exits on the lower deck had been locked from the outside. The charity event had been a trap, dressed in white tablecloths and champagne. Roman listened without moving. Only his thumb brushed lightly over Leora's knuckles. "Find the woman," he said. Thomas did not ask which woman. Everyone on that dock had already heard the same story. An unknown woman had gone onto the boat while others froze. She had broken a gate, carried Leora through smoke, and disappeared before anyone could take her name. A few witnesses remembered she was heavyset. One said she had kind eyes. One said she moved like she had no idea she was supposed to be afraid. A dock worker remembered the name on a torn laundry receipt that had fallen from her bag before she vanished. Voss Family Laundry. Roman found her 2 days later, not through a messenger, not through a phone call, and not through one of the smiling lawyers people like him used when they wanted to make kindness feel like business. He came himself. Clara was behind the counter sorting a pile of damp uniforms when the bell above the laundromat door gave its tired little jingle. The power had come back the morning before, but the air conditioning had not. The shop was hot, loud, and smelling of soap, wet cotton, and old metal. Clara looked up, ready to tell whoever had entered that the change machine was broken again, and stopped. Roman Kane stood in her doorway. He looked different in daylight, but not softer. He wore a dark linen suit that probably cost more than her building's monthly rent. His face was calm, but the kind of calm that felt earned through storms. Behind him, 2 men waited outside near a black car, pretending not to watch every corner of the street. Clara's first thought was that she had somehow done something wrong. Her second was that his daughter must have died. Her hand tightened around a wet shirt. Roman seemed to read the fear before she spoke. "Leora is alive," he said. "She is healing." Clara's breath left her so suddenly she had to grip the counter. "Thank God," she whispered. Roman's eyes changed at that. Not much, just enough. He looked at her as if those 2 words had told him something important. "You left before I could thank you," he said. "I did not need thanks. You saved my daughter's life." Clara looked down at the laundry in front of her. The words felt too large for the little shop. "I saw a child trapped. That is all." "That is not all," Roman said quietly. "Many people saw her. You were the one who went in." The dryers tumbled behind them, filling the silence with a low, steady thunder. Clara became painfully aware of the sweat at her temples, the old fan rattling in the corner, the cracked tile floor, and the fact that Roman Kane did not belong in a place where people argued over missing socks. He reached into his jacket and placed an envelope on the counter. "Inside is enough to clear your brother's medical debt, settle the rent dispute on this building, replace every machine here, and move you both somewhere safer. It is not charity. It is a debt." Clara stared at the envelope but did not touch it. For one dizzy second, the room seemed to tilt. Milo's bills, the landlord, the machines, the rotten wiring, the fear that woke her at 3 in the morning and sat on her chest until sunrise. The envelope could change everything. It could make her life wider than survival. It could give her back air. Then she thought of the little girl behind the gate, the weak hand gripping metal, the way nobody else had moved. Clara pushed the envelope back. Roman's gaze sharpened. "No, thank you," she said. He looked almost confused, as if no one had ever refused him in a language he understood. Clara forced herself to meet his eyes. "I did not save your daughter because she was Roman Kane's child. I saved her because she was a child. I am glad she is alive. I truly am. But I am not selling that moment back to you." The laundromat seemed to hold its breath. Outside, one of Roman's men shifted his weight. Roman did not look away from Clara. Most people, when standing in front of him, either shrank, performed, begged, or calculated. Clara did none of those things. She stood there in a faded cotton dress with burn marks near the hem, her soft arms crossed over her body, her tired face lifted toward his, and treated him like a man who needed to hear no. Something in Roman Kane went still. "You are very difficult to thank, Miss Voss," he said. Clara gave him a tired little smile. "I have been called worse." For the first time, something almost like warmth touched his mouth. Then he picked up the envelope and returned it to his jacket. "As you wish." But Roman Kane did not become the most powerful man on the Gulf Coast by accepting defeat gracefully. He kept his promise in the only way he knew how, which meant he did not keep it at all. A week later, a legal aid group Clara had never heard of offered to review her lease, and somehow found enough violations to force her landlord into a new agreement. 3 days after that, Milo was accepted into an advanced rehabilitation program through an anonymous medical grant. Then, electricians arrived, claiming the city had approved emergency repairs after a safety inspection Clara had never requested. New cameras appeared on the block. A security patrol began passing twice a night. The broken streetlight outside the laundromat, dark for almost 3 years, suddenly glowed bright enough to turn midnight silver. At first, Clara tried to believe in coincidence. She wanted to. Coincidence was easier than Roman Kane looking at her life from the shadows and quietly rearranging the pieces. But when Milo called her from rehab, voice shaking with hope because the new doctor had ideas no one else had offered, Clara sat behind the laundromat counter and cried into a stack of clean towels. Not because she was grateful, not only because she was grateful, because she felt handled, managed, moved around by invisible hands. That evening, she closed early and went to the address on the card Roman had left behind. His office was above a restored bank near the old business district, a place with marble columns, brass doors, and security men who looked at Clara as if they had already been told exactly who she was. No one tried to stop her. That made her angrier. Roman was waiting upstairs in a room with high windows and a view of the dark river. He stood when she entered. "Miss Voss, do not Miss Voss me," Clara said, her voice shaking with the force of everything she had been holding back. "You said as I wish. You said it like you understood. Then you went behind my back and started fixing my life like I was one more broken machine in my shop." Roman's expression remained calm, but his eyes did not. "Your brother needed care. My brother needed choice. I needed choice. Gratitude does not give you the right to manage me from a distance." The words struck harder than she expected. She saw it in the small tightening around his mouth. Roman turned away slightly, looking out at the city. For a long moment, he said nothing. "You are right," he said at last. Clara blinked. She had expected defense, power, a cold reminder that he could do what he wanted. Not that. Roman turned back to her. "I am used to solving danger with control. It has kept my daughter alive until now. It has kept my people alive. But you are not one of my businesses, and you are not one of my soldiers. I crossed a line." The apology was quiet, plain, and somehow more disarming than the envelope had been. "I will stop interfering," he said. Clara studied him, searching for the trap. "And the cameras?" "Neighborhood safety program," he said. "Roman." He exhaled slowly. "I will have them removed if you want." She did want that. Or she wanted to want it. But she thought of the men who came into the laundromat after dark. The drunk customers, the broken lock on the alley door, and the long walks home with keys between her fingers. Her anger softened at the edges, which annoyed her even more. "Leave the streetlight," she muttered. Again, that faint, almost smile touched his mouth. "The streetlight stays." Clara left believing she had won. Roman let her believe it because he had already learned something about Clara Voss. She would refuse a cage even if it was made of gold. She would not be bought, ordered, or softened by luxury. But the riverboat had been sabotage, and whoever planned it had failed to kill Leora because Clara had walked through smoke. If Roman's enemies learned her name, they would not see a brave woman. They would see a door into his heart. So Roman stopped fixing Clara's life where she could see it, and in the dark, where she could not, he placed guards around everything she loved. The first men who came for Clara Voss did not arrive with guns showing or masks over their faces. They came with clipboards, clean shirts, and fake city badges hanging from cheap plastic lanyards, because evil was smartest when it dressed itself like paperwork. The sun had already gone down, and the laundromat had that strange after-hours quiet Clara knew too well, the soft ticking of cooling dryers, the drip of water in the back, the faint smell of bleach and warm cotton hanging in the air. Outside, The repaired streetlight shone over the sidewalk, bright and steady, turning the front windows into dark mirrors. Clara was alone behind the counter, counting the last few bills from the register, when the bell above the door gave its tired little ring, and two men stepped inside, wearing smiles that did not reach their eyes. One of them said there had been a gas leak reported on the block, and that she needed to leave immediately. The other stayed near the door, watching the street instead of the machines. Clara felt the warning before she understood it. Maybe it was the way the first man held his badge too high and too fast. Maybe it was the way his boots were too clean for someone walking through New Orleans utility grime. Maybe it was because Clara had spent her whole life being underestimated, and people who underestimated her always got lazy. She looked past them through the front glass and saw a third man waiting near an unmarked van with the engine running. Her heart began to pound, but her face stayed tired and plain. She had survived landlords, hospital billing offices, broken dryers, and customers who screamed over lost socks. Fear was not new to her. She let her hand drift below the counter, where the old metal scoop for detergent sat beside a mug of pens. The man with the fake badge stepped closer and told her there was no time to argue. His smile vanished. He reached for her arm. Clara moved. She flung the scoop full of powdered detergent into his face. The man cursed and stumbled back, clawing at his eyes. The second man lunged from the doorway, and Clara grabbed the rolling laundry cart beside the counter and shoved it hard into his knees. He crashed into a row of folding chairs. Clara turned toward the back room, but the first man caught the end of her dress and yanked. Fabric tore. She grabbed the steaming kettle she used to loosen old stains and threw the hot water across the floor between them, forcing him to jump back with a sharp cry. Then she lifted the heavy iron press handle and swung it like a weapon, her soft arms shaking, her breath coming fast, her whole body turning into a wall between herself and whatever waited outside. The door burst open before the men could recover, not from the attackers, but from the shadows beyond the streetlight. Roman's guards swept inside with quiet, frightening speed. One man was pinned against the washer. Another hit the tile hard enough to knock the air out of him. The third tried to run for the van, but a tall, stone-faced man with silver at his temples caught him by the back of the collar and put him face first against the hood. Clara stood behind the counter with the iron press handle still raised, her chest heaving, detergent dust floating around her like pale smoke. The silver-haired man came in last. He was calm, controlled, and built like a locked door. He introduced himself as Tomas Rook, Roman's security chief, though Clara already knew without being told. Nobody else moved like they had measured every exit before entering the room. He asked if she was hurt. Clara stared at him, then at the guards, then at the men on the floor. "You have been watching me," she said. Tomas did not insult her by lying. "Yes? For how long?" "Since the night after you came to Mr. Kane's office." Anger rose in her so fast it nearly covered the fear. Clara lowered the metal handle with a hard clatter. "Of course," she whispered. "Of course he apologized to my face and kept guards in my life anyway." Tomas showed her the evidence because he was too practical to argue with pride, while danger was still breathing in the room. He showed her photos of the men near Milo's rehab center, messages intercepted from people who knew she had pulled Leora Kane from the riverboat, a plan to take Clara, trade her for access to the child, and force Roman into the open. Clara's anger did not disappear. It only changed shape. It became colder, sharper, because now Milo was in it. Now Leora was in it. Now her little laundromat, the only thing she had left of her father, had become a battlefield because she had done the right thing. Roman arrived 10 minutes later. He did not storm in like a king expecting obedience. He came through the door and stopped when he saw Clara standing there with her torn dress, her flushed face, and her hands still trembling from the fight. His eyes moved over her carefully, checking for blood, bruises, fear, and damage. When he saw she was mostly unharmed, Something inside his expression loosened, but only for a breath. Then he looked at the men who had tried to take her, and the room seemed to become smaller. Clara did not give him time to speak. "You promised." Roman's jaw tightened. "I promised to stop interfering. You promised to stop managing my life." "I did not promise to let my enemies use you as bait. That is not your choice to make." "No," Roman said quietly, "but keeping you alive is." The words hung between them, heavy and impossible. Clara wanted to hate him for it. She wanted the clean comfort of being right and angry. But one of the men on the floor had a strip of tape in his pocket, another had a syringe, and outside, the van's back seat had been covered in plastic. Clara thought of Milo laughing into the phone from the rehab center. She thought of Leora's small hand gripping the service gate in the smoke. Her anger did not fade, but it had to step aside for the truth. When Roman said she and Milo needed to leave the neighborhood for a while, Clara refused so quickly it sounded like instinct. She would not become a prisoner in some rich man's fortress. She would not let a dangerous man wrap fear in luxury and call it protection. Roman listened. He did not interrupt. Then he said Milo's name. That was what broke her. By midnight, Clara was riding through the dark roads outside New Orleans in the back of a black SUV, with Milo beside her and Roman sitting across from them in silence. Milo tried to make a joke about being kidnapped by a handsome billionaire with frightening cheekbones, but his voice shook at the end. Clara held his hand the whole ride. Roman watched the city fall away through the tinted window, his face unreadable. He did not touch Clara. He did not ask her to forgive him. That almost made it worse. The Kane house was not really a house. It had once been a monastery, built of pale stone and old faith, tucked beyond guarded roads where the marshland opened wide and dark under the moon. Iron gates stood between cypress trees. Lanterns glowed along arched walkways. The air smelled of wet grass, old brick, and distant water. Clara expected cold marble and silent servants. Instead, she found wide wooden halls, a courtyard full of jasmine, walls softened by age, and a child waiting barefoot at the top of the stairs in a blue nightgown. Leora Kane had been through fire and smoke and still looked impossibly small in the great stone house. The moment she saw Clara, her face changed. She did not smile at first. She simply breathed her name like she had been holding it in her chest for days. Clara. Then the little girl ran. Clara barely had time to open her arms before Leora crashed into her. Thin arms wrapping around her waist, face buried against her stomach. Clara froze, overwhelmed by the trust in that small body. Then she held her back. Roman stood at the bottom of the stairs, watching with a look so raw and quiet that Clara had to turn away from it. After that, the monastery began changing in ways no guard could command. Clara did not mean to become part of the house. She had planned to stay distant, polite, temporary. But Leora followed her like a little shadow. She sat in Clara's room while Clara mended a torn shirt for Milo. She asked how sewing machines worked. She wanted to know why thread tangled, why buttons fell off, why some dresses made people feel like princesses and others made them feel like they were pretending. Clara answered every question. She showed Leora how to cut cloth without rushing, how to tie a knot, how to stuff scraps into the belly of a tiny cloth rabbit until it became soft and real. Leora's nightmares did not vanish. Some nights she woke screaming because she smelled smoke that was not there. Roman would reach her room first, always. But Clara learned that sometimes a child did not need a powerful father pacing like a wounded animal. Sometimes she needed a warm hand, a damp cloth, a low voice, and permission to be afraid without being treated like broken glass. Clara sat beside her bed and told her ordinary things, how Dryers ate quarters, how Milo once tried to dye his sneakers blue and stained the bathtub for a month, how her father believed lost socks were proof that tiny laundry ghosts existed and had terrible fashion sense. Slowly, Leora began to laugh again. Roman noticed everything. He noticed that his daughter stopped flinching when doors closed. He noticed the little cloth animals lined along her pillows. He noticed drawings taped to her wall, most of them showing a round woman with dark hair, carrying a small girl through smoke, always with bright yellow light around them. He noticed that Clara never softened the truth too much, never lied to Leora with empty promises, and never treated her like a princess locked in a tower. She treated her like a child who had survived something terrible and still deserved jam on toast, crooked stitches, silly songs, and a bedtime story that did not end in fear. Roman began coming home earlier. At first, he told himself it was for Leora. Then he told himself it was because enemies were moving and he needed to be near the secure command rooms beneath the monastery. Then one evening he found Clara in the courtyard, hanging little strips of colored fabric from a line so Leora could choose pieces for doll dresses, and he stood under the archway for a long time without saying a word. Clara looked up and caught him watching. Most women Roman knew either performed for his gaze or hid from it. Clara did neither. She pinned a red square of cloth to the line and asked if mafia kings had any useful opinions about button colors. Roman said black. Clara said that was the saddest answer anyone had ever given. Leora chose yellow. Milo, who had been sitting nearby in his wheelchair with a lemonade balanced on one knee, declared yellow the only morally acceptable choice. Roman looked at the three of them, at the colored fabric moving in the warm evening breeze, at his daughter laughing in the courtyard, where no one had laughed freely in years, and felt something inside him ache with dangerous hope. But outside the monastery, the war was tightening. Roman's men moved against the rival syndicate, yet every move seemed to fail before it began. A warehouse was empty minutes before his team arrived. A legal shipment tied to one of his clean companies was sabotaged at the port. A meeting with union leaders was ambushed by police acting on an anonymous tip. Safe houses became unsafe. Routes became traps. Roman trusted very few people, but someone close was breathing secrets into enemy hands. Clara saw it before most of his men did, because Clara knew what it meant to be invisible. People forgot she was in the room. They spoke around her while she hemmed curtains, repaired Leora's dress, or sat beside Milo near the window. She noticed who entered Roman's study before bad news followed. She noticed who left charity documents on the wrong desk. She noticed the calm face of Father Elias Draven each time disaster arrived. Elias was old, soft-spoken, and treated by everyone in the house like a sacred piece of family history. He had known Roman as a boy. He had managed the Cain Charitable Foundations for years. He walked slowly, blessed children on the forehead, and wore grief like a holy garment. Roman trusted him in a way he trusted almost no one. That was why Clara did not speak at first. She watched. She wrote things down. Times, names, doors closing, calls made. The pattern grew until it no longer felt like suspicion. It felt like proof. When Clara brought it to Roman, he rejected it, not cruelly, not loudly, but with a pain that made his voice go flat. "Not Elias," he said. Clara sat across from him in his study, her notebook open on the desk between them. "I am not asking you to believe me because I feel something. I am asking you to test it." He looked at the pages, then at her. Clara's voice softened. "Memory can lie when love is holding it too tightly." That was the sentence that reached him. Roman gave Elias false information about a transfer of incriminating ledgers through an abandoned sugar refinery outside the city. No such transfer existed. Thomas placed men in the dark and waited. Near dawn, the rival syndicate arrived exactly where Elias believed the ledgers would be. The betrayal did not make Roman rage at first. It made him silent. For hours after Elias disappeared, Roman stood alone in the old chapel at the center of the monastery. Clara found him there as sunlight pushed through stained glass and painted his shirt in broken colors. He looked less like a feared man and more like a boy who had just learned the hand that raised him had also held the knife. Elias had sold information for years. He had helped enemies move around Roman's defenses. He may have known about the attack that killed Roman's wife. He may have helped make Leora motherless. Clara did not touch him until he reached for her first. When he did, it was only his hand closing around hers, but the gesture felt more intimate than any confession. His fingers were cold. Clara stood beside him in the colored light and did not tell him it would be okay. Some things were not okay. Some things only became survivable because someone stayed. Elias ran because guilty men always believed one last desperate move could save them. He had no army left, no safe road, no clean escape. But he knew Roman's heart. He knew the one person Roman would trade the world to protect. Leora's school trip to the city museum had been planned before the riverboat attack, cancelled, then quietly restored after Leora begged to go. Roman had doubled security. Tomas had checked every staff list. Clara went along because Leora asked her to help with a small notebook of costume sketches in the historical clothing exhibit. The museum was cool, quiet, and full of polished floors that reflected the soft glow of display lights. For a while, Leora was only a child again, pointing at old gowns behind glass, whispering that Clara could make something prettier. Then Clara saw Elias. He was dressed as a volunteer, his hair hidden under a cap, his shoulders curved, his face turned slightly away. But Clara knew the shape of him. She knew the careful stillness. She knew the kind old eyes that had never looked surprised when Roman's plans failed. Her body went cold. She did not scream. She did not run wildly. She took Leora's hand and told her they were going to look at something special. With her other hand, she sent Roman the hidden message Tomas had made her promise to use if anything felt wrong. Then she guided Leora away from the group and into the closed restoration wing, where cloth-covered displays and wooden crates waited in dim rows. Leora sensed the fear. Clara could feel it in her small fingers. "Is it smoke again?" Leora whispered. "No, baby," Clara said softly. "This time we are ahead of the fire." Elias followed. His voice came from the far end of the corridor, gentle and terrible. "Leora, child, come here. Your father is confused. Miss Clara does not understand." Clara locked the first door behind them. Elias had a key. She dragged a crate across the next hallway. He shoved through it. She pulled Leora into a costume storage room filled with old theater garments, fabric racks, masks, hats, and painted scenery from forgotten exhibits. It smelled of dust and velvet. Clara pushed Leora behind a row of hanging coats and pressed a finger to her lips. "No matter what you hear, stay hidden." The door shook. Elias called her selfish, then foolish, then dangerous. His softness burned away with every word until the old holy man was gone and only the frightened traitor remained. When he broke through, Clara was waiting. She shoved a tall rack of heavy costumes into his path. He stumbled, cursing as velvet, wool, and wooden hangers tangled around him. Clara grabbed a stage prop, a painted wooden staff from some old production, and swung it at his wrist when he reached into his coat. Something metallic clattered across the floor. Elias lunged. Clara backed into a table, pain flashing through her hip, but she did not fall. She thought of the riverboat, of the service gate, of every person who had ever looked at her and decided she would move slowly, think slowly, break easily. She grabbed a bolt of heavy fabric and threw it over his head, twisting hard. Elias shouted, blinded, fighting the weight of it. Clara used all of herself then, every pound, every stubborn breath, every year of carrying loads alone, and drove him backward into the racks. Roman arrived like a storm held in human form. Tomas was with him. Guards flooded the room. Elias was dragged down alive, still wrapped in torn fabric, still spitting excuses that sounded smaller each time he said Roman's name. Roman did not look at him first. He looked for Leora. The little girl crawled out from behind the coats and ran into his arms. Roman held her so tightly Clara had to look away. Then Leora reached one hand back for Clara. That was how Roman found them, his daughter tucked against his chest, her other hand holding the woman who had saved her twice. Elias's arrest opened the old world like a rotten wall. Ledgers, accounts, officials, judges, syndicate routes, shell charities, and years of buried crimes came loose one after another. Roman could have answered betrayal with blood. Everyone expected him to. Some even waited for it. But he had seen his daughter hiding in a museum storage room because men kept feeding violence and calling it legacy. He had seen Clara stand between a child and danger with nothing but fabric, instinct, and courage. For the first time in his life, Roman Cain understood that power, which could only protect by destroying, would one day destroy what it loved. So he made a different choice. He turned the evidence over to federal investigators through lawyers clean enough to survive the storm. His enemies were arrested. Corrupt officials were exposed. Businesses that had lived in shadows were cut loose, sold, or rebuilt under names that could stand in daylight. Men who had served Roman only because they feared him left. Men who stayed learned new rules. The Cain Empire did not vanish, but it changed. It became smaller in some ways, cleaner in others, and far less hungry. When the danger finally passed, Clara packed her bags. Roman found her in the courtyard folding Leora's cloth animals into a box so the child could keep the ones she loved most. For a moment, he looked like he might argue. The old Roman would have. The old Roman would have built a beautiful reason she should stay, and placed guards around it until it looked like love. But this Roman had learned that safety without choice was only another locked gate. "You are leaving," he said. Clara nodded. "Milo needs home. So do I." Roman looked toward the open doors where Leora was helping Milo choose which little rabbit belonged in the front of the box. "And you?" Clara's throat tightened. "I need to remember what my life feels like when nobody is holding it for me." He accepted that because he loved her enough not to make his love another kind of pressure. He sent no envelope. He made no secret arrangements. He only had Tomas drive Clara and Milo back to their neighborhood, and watched from the monastery steps as the car disappeared through the trees. Voss Family Laundry reopened 2 weeks later, but it did not return as the same tired little shop. Clara cleared out the front half, painted the walls a warm cream, and hung fabric from wooden shelves her father would have loved. One side still had washers and dryers, because bills did not vanish just because a woman survived a mafia war. But the other side became Clara's sewing and alteration studio. She made dresses, jackets, skirts, and soft, bright clothes for women who were tired of being told to hide. Fat women came first from the neighborhood, then from across the city. They cried in fitting rooms because Clara did not ask them to shrink. She asked them what they wanted to feel like when they walked into a room. Milo handled appointments from the front desk and became very serious about window displays. He claimed the shop needed drama. Clara told him one Roman Cain in her life was enough drama for any woman. Milo said Roman had excellent posture and should be studied for branding purposes. Roman started visiting with Leora on Saturday afternoons. At first, he said he was only bringing his daughter because she missed Clara. Then he came with a torn cuff. Then with a button that did not match any shirt Clara had ever seen him wear. Then with coffee exactly the way Clara liked it, though she had no memory of telling him. He never pushed. He never asked for more than she gave. He sat in the corner while Leora chose fabrics, and Milo lectured him about thread color. Sometimes Clara caught Roman looking around the shop with quiet wonder, as if steam, laughter, and ordinary noise were treasures he had spent his whole life too rich to afford. Slowly, without a grand confession, he became part of the place. The laundromat no longer felt like the grave of Clara's dreams. It became the ground where they grew back. There were still hard days. Machines broke. Customers complained. Milo had pain. Leora still had nightmares sometimes. Roman still carried shadows in him that would not disappear just because he had stepped into the light. But love, Clara learned, did not need everything to be perfect. Sometimes it only needed people who kept choosing to come back gently. One evening, near the end of summer, Clara finished fitting Leora for a handmade dress made of soft yellow fabric with tiny white flowers stitched near the hem. The child stood in front of the mirror, turning carefully, her face glowing with the shy pride of someone seeing herself as beautiful after fear had made the world too large. Roman stood behind her, holding the sewing basket without complaint, though bright ribbons spilled over one of his expensive sleeves. Milo sat by the window, pretending not to be emotional and failing badly. Leora stepped down from the fitting stool and took Clara's hand in one of hers. Then she reached for Roman with the other. She looked up at Clara with serious eyes. "You saved me twice," she said. "Once from the smoke, and once from being scared forever." Clara could not speak. Roman looked at her across their daughter's small hands, and there was no need to name everything out loud. The city outside glowed gold and purple, the streets still warm from the day, the air smelling of rain, river water, detergent, and fresh coffee. Clara turned off the sewing machine. Milo locked the register. Roman carried Leora's basket like it was something sacred, and when Clara locked the shop door, she did not feel like she was closing away a life she had settled for. She felt like she was protecting a life she had chosen. Together, they walked down the sidewalk under the repaired streetlight, not as a debt unpaid, not as a rescue unfinished, not as a lonely woman and a dangerous man bound by smoke and fear, but as something quieter and stronger. A family, still learning its shape, a little strange, a little wounded, a little impossible, but real. And in a city that had once gone dark enough to reveal every hidden thing, Clara Voss finally stepped into the light without asking anyone's permission to be seen. No one at the St. Aurelia charity gala expected the most dangerous man in the city to stand up for a pregnant coat-check girl covered in broken sugar and spilled syrup. The guests had come that night to drink champagne, smile for cameras, and pretend their donations made them kind. They had not come to watch an old money princess destroy a poor woman in front of everyone. They had not come to see a silent ballroom turn cold with fear. And they had certainly not come to witness Dante Moretti, the man whose name wealthy men only whispered behind locked doors, step out from the shadowed balcony with murder quiet in his eyes. The St. Aurelia Grand Hall glowed like something from a dream. Crystal chandeliers floated above the ballroom like frozen stars. White roses spilled from gold vases on every table. Tall windows looked out over the city, where winter rain painted the streets silver beneath the soft yellow lights. Every guest seemed polished, expensive, and untouchable. Women moved through the room in silk gowns that whispered against the marble floor. Men laughed into their glasses, as if the whole world belonged to them. A string quartet played near the fountain, gentle and sweet, almost soft enough to hide the sharpness in the room. Maribel stood near the back corridor with a row of velvet coat tickets tucked carefully between her fingers. Her black uniform dress stretched tightly over her round belly, and no matter how often she adjusted the apron tied beneath her chest, it still felt too small. She was tired in that deep way that lived in her bones now. Her feet ached. Her lower back throbbed. The baby had been restless all afternoon, pressing and turning as if the little one already understood that the world outside was loud and unkind. Mara rested one hand against her stomach and took a slow breath, reminding herself that the night would end, the guests would leave, and by morning there would be another few dollars added to the envelope hidden beneath her mattress. She worked coat check during the first half of the gala and helped in the kitchen when the rush slowed down. It was not glamorous work, but Mara had never needed glamorous. She needed rent. She needed vitamins. She needed a safe crib and warm blankets and enough savings to keep the lights on after the baby came. During the day, she helped at a small bakery on the east side, rolling dough, boxing cakes, and cleaning flour from the counters long after closing. At night, Whenever Saint Aurelia needed extra hands, she came here, smiling softly at guests who barely looked at her face. Most of them saw only her body before they saw anything else. They saw her full cheeks, her heavy arms, her wide hips, and the swollen curve of her pregnancy beneath her uniform. They saw a poor fat woman carrying trays, folding coats, and stepping out of the way. Some looked through her like she was furniture. Others looked at her too long, with that cold little smile that made her feel like a mistake taking up space. Mara had learned to lower her eyes, soften her voice, and keep moving. Pride was a luxury, and she could not afford many luxuries. Still, there was something gentle inside her that the world had never managed to break. When a nervous server dropped a stack of napkins, Mara helped her pick them up. When the old dishwasher in the back kitchen coughed too hard, Mara brought him tea with honey. When a child at the edge of the ballroom began crying because his little bow tie was too tight, Mara knelt carefully despite the pain in her knees and loosened it with a smile. She did small, kind things without expecting anyone to notice. Most people never did. Near the center of the ballroom stood the dessert tower, the pride of the evening. It rose in shining layers of glass, cream, spun sugar, and gold leaf. There were tiny chocolate domes, lemon tarts, almond cakes, honey custards, and sugar roses so delicate they looked like they might melt if someone breathed too close. Dark caramel syrup had been drizzled in thin, perfect lines across the trays. The head pastry chef had warned everyone to keep guests from leaning against the table. One wrong bump, he had said, and the whole thing would come down. Mara was refilling a tray of sugared pears when Bianca Vale swept toward the dessert display, with 3 laughing friends behind her. Bianca was beautiful in a sharp, expensive way, with pale blonde hair pulled into a smooth knot and diamonds at her throat. Her dress was silver blue, custom-made, fitted so perfectly that it seemed less sewn than poured over her body. She was the daughter of the Vale family, one of the oldest names in the city. People stepped aside when Bianca walked by. They smiled before she spoke. They forgave her before she misbehaved. She was holding a glass of champagne and speaking too loudly, her laughter cutting through the music. Mara saw the danger before anyone else did. Bianca was walking backward, showing off the low back of her gown to her friends, one careless step at a time. Her elbow brushed the edge of the dessert table. The glass tower trembled. A thin sugar sculpture leaned dangerously to one side. Mara moved without thinking. She set down the tray and hurried forward, both hands reaching to steady the dessert stand. Her belly made her slower than she wanted to be, but she caught the first glass plate before it tipped. A small bowl of dark syrup slid toward the edge. Mara grabbed for it, but Bianca turned suddenly, crashing her hip into Mara's arm. The bowl flipped. Thick syrup splashed across the lower side of Bianca's gown, leaving a dark stain against the pale, shining fabric. For one breath, nothing happened. Bianca looked down. Her friends stopped laughing. Mara froze with her hands still raised, her heart falling into her stomach. Then Bianca screamed. The sound sliced through the music. The quartet faltered. Heads turned. Conversations died one by one until the whole room seemed to lean toward them. "You ruined my dress," Bianca said, her voice shaking with rage. "Do you have any idea what this costs?" Mara's mouth went dry. "Miss Vale, I'm so sorry. The tower was falling. I tried to catch it." Bianca stared at her, as if Mara had spoken a language beneath her. "You tried to catch it? With what? Your whole body?" A few people laughed softly, not loudly, not bravely, just enough to hurt. Mara felt heat crawl up her neck. She placed one hand over her belly, steadying herself. "I didn't mean to touch you. I was only trying to stop the display from breaking." Bianca stepped closer. The scent of her perfume was sharp and sweet. "You people always have an excuse." Before Mara could answer, Bianca's mother appeared beside her, wrapped in ivory satin and cold authority. Evelyn Vale had the kind of face that never needed to raise its voice to be cruel. Her eyes moved over Mara's body, pausing at her stomach, her apron, her shoes. "What is she doing in the ballroom?" Evelyn asked, not looking at Mara when she spoke. "Staff like this should remain in the back." Mara swallowed. The baby moved beneath her palm, a small roll of life against her fear. "I work here, Mom." "That is obvious," Evelyn said. "Painfully obvious." Bianca let out a bitter laugh, still holding the stained fabric away from her leg. "She threw syrup on me. Everyone saw it." "I didn't," Mara whispered. "You didn't." Bianca's voice rose again, feeding on the attention. "So now I'm lying?" The room was full of people, but Mara suddenly felt alone, in a way that made the chandeliers seem very far away. She looked toward the head server, hoping he might speak up. He had seen Bianca stumble. He had seen Mara reach for the tower, but his face had gone pale. His eyes dropped to the floor. The Vale family donated too much money. The Vale family knew too many board members. The Vale family could have a person fired with one bored phone call over breakfast. Mara understood. That was the worst part. She understood why no one helped. "I'll pay for cleaning," she said, though she had no idea how she would. "I'll work extra shifts. Please, I didn't mean any harm." Bianca looked at Mara's hand resting over her stomach, and something cruel flashed across her perfect face. "Extra shifts? Look at you. You can barely stand. Maybe if you had made better choices, you wouldn't be waddling around charity galas ruining things you could never afford." The words landed quietly, but they went deep. Mara's throat tightened. She would not cry. Not here, not in front of these people. She had cried in bus stations, in laundry rooms, in the tiny bathroom of her apartment with the water running so no one could hear. But she would not give Bianca Vale that pleasure. Evelyn sighed, as if Mara were a stain on the evening. Someone remove her before she embarrasses the foundation further. Mara took a careful step back, ready to leave, ready to disappear the way she always did. But Bianca was not finished. Humiliation had not been enough. She wanted a scene. She wanted the room to remember her as the victim, and Mara as the clumsy, greedy girl who had ruined something beautiful. Bianca grabbed Mara's arm. The grip was hard and sudden. Mara gasped, more from shock than pain, and tried to pull away. "Please don't. Don't touch me like you're innocent," Bianca snapped. "You already ruined my gown." She shoved Mara backward. Mara's heel caught on the edge of the rug beneath the dessert table. For one terrible second, she felt her balance vanish. Her arms flew around her stomach. She turned her body with every bit of strength she had, trying to shield the baby as her back struck the dessert display. Glass shattered behind her. The sound was bright and awful, like ice breaking across a dark lake. Sugar sculptures collapsed in glittering pieces. Plates slid and crashed to the floor. Cream smeared across the marble. Caramel syrup spilled in long black ribbons around Mara's shoes. She sank down hard, one knee hitting the ground, her breath knocked from her chest. Something sharp cut her wrist. Something cold slid down the side of her neck. The whole beautiful tower came apart around her, while the richest people in the city stood frozen and watched. Mara did not scream. She only wrapped both arms around her belly and bent forward, whispering, "It's okay. It's okay, little one. I've got you." The ballroom went silent. Not quiet. Silent. Even Bianca seemed startled by what she had done, but only for a moment. Then her face hardened again, because people like Bianca did not survive by feeling guilt. They survived by turning guilt into blame. "She attacked me," Bianca said quickly, her voice trembling just enough to sound believable. "She grabbed my dress, and then she threw herself into the table." Mara lifted her face. A thin line of blood ran from the small cut on her wrist. Her breathing was uneven. "That isn't true." Evelyn looked around at the guests, measuring the room, choosing the story that would protect her daughter. "This is outrageous." She is unstable. Someone call security. At the far end of the ballroom, above the main floor, a private balcony overlooked the gala. It was hidden behind tall marble columns and soft shadow, reserved for donors who did not enjoy crowds. A man stood there with one hand resting on the railing, his dark suit almost blending into the black velvet drapes behind him. Dante Moretti had watched the entire thing. He had not planned to stay long that night. To the public, he was a generous donor with quiet investments and a taste for privacy. To the men who owed him money, feared his patience, or survived because he allowed it, he was something else entirely. Dante owned pieces of the city that did not appear on paper. He controlled contracts, nightclubs, warehouses, judges, favors, secrets. He did not shout. He did not need to. His power moved beneath the city like deep water, unseen until it swallowed someone whole. For most of the evening he had been bored. The gala was full of people who smiled too much and meant too little. He had watched them trade favors under the cover of charity, each handshake polished smooth enough to hide the knife beneath. Then he had seen the woman near the dessert tower. At first, she was only a quiet figure in black, moving carefully through the bright room. Pregnant, tired, soft-faced. Ignored. He noticed the way she stepped aside for everyone, the way she touched her belly when the room grew too loud, the way she helped a young server without asking for thanks. Something about her patience unsettled him. In his world, patience was usually a weapon. In her, it looked like survival. Then Bianca pushed her. Dante's hand tightened on the balcony rail. Below, security began moving toward Mara, not toward Bianca. That told him everything about the room. They had seen the truth and chosen power anyway. Dante stepped away from the railing. The man beside him, his oldest guard, leaned closer. "Boss?" Dante did not look at him. "Call a doctor, now." Then he walked down the private staircase. No announcement was made. No music rose. No one called his name. But the room felt him before it saw him. Conversations stopped in a ripple as Dante Moretti entered the ballroom. He moved slowly, his black suit clean and perfect, his expression calm enough to frighten anyone who knew what calm meant on a man like him. The guests parted before him without being asked. Bianca's face changed when she saw him. So did her mother's. Mara stayed on the floor, one hand pressed to her belly, the other trembling against the broken glass. She looked up as the tall stranger approached, and for a moment she forgot the room, the pain, the shame. His eyes were dark and steady, and there was something in them she did not understand. Not pity, not exactly anger, something quieter, something dangerous and deeply awake. Dante stopped beside her and looked at the security guards first. "Touch her," he said softly, "and you will regret having hands." No one moved. Then he crouched in front of Mara, lowering himself to her level as if the marble floor and broken dessert meant nothing. His voice changed when he spoke to her. It did not become warm exactly. Men like Dante did not turn warm easily, but it became careful. "Are you hurt?" Mara stared at him, confused by the question, because everyone else had only asked what she had done. "I don't know." His gaze dropped to her arms, wrapped around her stomach. Something flickered in his face. "The baby?" "She moved," Mara whispered. "I think she's scared." "She?" Dante asked. Mara blinked, surprised by the softness of the question. "I don't know for sure. I just call the baby she sometimes." Dante nodded once, as if this mattered, as if every word she said mattered. Behind him, Bianca found her voice. "Mr. Moretti, thank goodness. This woman ruined my gown, and then caused this entire mess. My family is deeply sorry you had to see such an ugly scene." Dante did not turn around. His attention remained on Mara's wrist, where blood had gathered near the small burn scar that crossed her skin. It was pale and old, curved like a memory that had never fully faded. Just below it, tied carefully despite years of wear, was a thin blue thread bracelet. The ballroom disappeared from Dante's mind. Rain, thunder, the smell of bread in a dark kitchen, blood soaking through his shirt, a young woman's frightened hands pressing a towel against his side, men shouting in the alley outside, a hot tray slipping, her sharp breath when it burned her wrist, her voice telling him to stay quiet, that she would not let them find him. Dante stared at the scar. For years, he had searched for a ghost from a stormy night, a girl from a bakery who had saved his life and vanished before dawn. He had remembered her hands, her kindness, the blue thread around her wrist. He had remembered the way she lied to armed men while shaking so badly he thought she might faint. He had remembered that she never asked who he was, never asked for money, never asked for anything at all. And now she was here, on the floor of his own gala, pregnant, bleeding, humiliated by people who thought she was nothing. His expression did not change, but something inside him went terribly still. Mara saw him looking at her wrist and pulled her hand back, embarrassed by the scar, by the cheap bracelet, by all the small signs of a life that had never been easy. Dante looked up at her. "What is your name?" "Mara," she said. "Mara Bell." The name entered him like a vow. Bianca stepped closer, impatient now. "Mr. Moretti, she needs to be removed before the press notices." Dante finally stood. The room seemed to shrink around him. He turned toward Bianca, and the spoiled confidence on her face began to thin. Evelyn Vale reached for her daughter's arm, suddenly aware that the air had changed. "No," Dante said. Bianca gave a nervous little laugh. "No, no," he repeated, his voice still low, still controlled. "She will not be removed. She will sit. She will be examined by a doctor, and every person in this room will remember that they watched a pregnant woman fall and chose silence." No one breathed. Mara stared up at him, her eyes wide, her heart beating too fast. She did not know this man. She did not know why his voice could turn a ballroom full of powerful people into frightened statues. She only knew that, for the first time that night, someone had placed himself between her and the cruelty coming toward her. Dante looked at the head server. "Bring a chair." The man moved instantly. "And water." Another server rushed away. "And find the security footage." Evelyn's face tightened. "Surely that is not necessary." Dante's eyes settled on her. "It is necessary because your daughter is lying." The words fell cleanly, without effort, and still they struck harder than any shout. Bianca went pale. "How dare you?" Dante stepped closer to her. Only one step, but it was enough to make her shrink back. "Careful," he said. "You are speaking in a room that does not belong to you." A chair was brought. Dante turned from Bianca as if she no longer deserved his attention. He crouched again and offered Mara his hand. She hesitated. His hand was large, steady and clean. Hers was sticky with syrup and trembling from shock. She almost refused because she did not want to stain him. The thought was ridiculous, but it came anyway. She had spent her whole life trying not to leave marks where people did not want her. Dante seemed to understand. He reached a little closer, patient but firm. "You can lean on me," he said. Mara placed her hand in his. The moment his fingers closed around hers, Dante felt the past and present fold together. The bakery, the storm, the girl who saved him, the woman before him now. He helped her sit as carefully as if she were made of glass and fire. Mara lowered herself into the chair with a soft wince, still holding her belly. The baby moved again. Mara's eyes filled with tears, not from the pain this time, but from relief so sudden it made her weak. "She moved," she whispered. Dante's face softened for half a second. Good. Medical help arrived through the side entrance, led by one of Dante's men, instead of the gala staff. The guests watched in silence as the doctor knelt beside Mara, checked her pulse, examined the cut on her wrist, and asked quiet questions about pain, dizziness, and the baby's movement. Mara answered as best she could, ashamed of how many people were staring. Dante stood beside her chair the entire time. When the doctor recommended taking her to the hospital for monitoring, Mara immediately shook her head. "I can't afford that." The doctor glanced at Dante. Dante's voice was calm. "She can." Mara looked up quickly. "No, I can't." "You can tonight." "I don't know you," she said, and the honesty in her voice was small but strong. Something like respect moved across Dante's face. "No, you don't. I can't take money from strangers." "I am not offering charity." "Then what is it?" Dante looked at the blue thread bracelet again, then back into her eyes. He could have told her the truth right there. He could have said that once, years ago, she had hidden him when he was hunted and bleeding. He could have said that her small act of mercy had followed him through every brutal year after. But Mara was shaking. Her pride was the only shield she had left in that room, and he would not tear it away just to ease the ache in his own chest. So he said, "Consider it a debt. You can repay it when you choose." Mara studied him with tired suspicion. "People like me don't usually get debts from people like you." Dante's mouth almost curved, but not quite. "People like me usually remember what we owe." She did not understand the meaning beneath his words. Not yet. The doctor helped her stand, and Dante's hand hovered near her back without touching unless she needed him. As they guided her toward the private exit, the room remained silent. Mara could feel every stare following her. Some were curious, some were ashamed, some were angry that the story had not ended with her removal. Bianca stood near her ruined gown, frozen in disbelief. Just before Mara reached the side corridor, she looked back once. Not at Bianca, not at Evelyn. At the shattered dessert tower glittering under the chandelier light. So much beauty, broken in a moment, and everyone had cared more about the gown than the woman lying among the glass. Dante followed her gaze. Then he looked at the room. "The gala is over," he said. No one argued. Outside, the rain had softened to a mist. A black car waited at the curb, its windows dark, its engine running. Mara paused before getting in, suddenly overwhelmed by the strange turn her life had taken. An hour ago, she had been trying to finish a shift. Now she was being taken to a private hospital by a man who made powerful people tremble. She looked at Dante. "Why are you helping me?" For the first time that night, he did not answer right away. "Because you saved me once," he thought. "Because I have carried your kindness like a secret wound. Because the world put you on the floor, and I will make it kneel for you." But he only opened the car door and said, "Because someone should have." Mara held his gaze for a moment, then climbed carefully into the car, one hand on her stomach, the other resting over the old burn scar she had forgotten anyone could notice. Dante watched her settle into the seat, his face unreadable in the rain. As the car pulled away from Santarellia, the lights of the gala faded behind them. Inside the ballroom, the Vale family stood surrounded by broken sugar, ruined silk, and the first cold taste of fear. Outside, Mara Bell leaned against the soft leather seat, exhausted and confused, unaware that the quiet stranger beside her had just recognized her as the woman he had searched for across years of blood and silence. And Dante Moretti, who had built an empire by never letting emotion rule him, looked at her sleeping face in the passing glow of the city lights, and understood with dangerous clarity that his old debt had finally found a name. By morning, Mara Bell woke to the soft beep of hospital machines and the strange smell of clean sheets, rainwater, and roses. For a few confused seconds, she did not remember where she was. Then her hand moved to her stomach, quick and frightened, and the baby answered with a slow little push beneath her palm. Mara closed her eyes as tears slipped quietly into her hair. She was safe. The baby was safe. The world had not ended inside that glittering ballroom, even though for a moment, on the floor beneath broken glass and spilled syrup, it had felt like it might. The room around her was private and quiet, larger than any apartment she had ever lived in. A soft lamp glowed near the window. Fresh clothes sat folded on a chair. Someone had placed a small tray of warm tea and toast on the table beside her bed. There were flowers, too, not the expensive stiff kind arranged to impress people, but wild white blooms tied loosely with string. Mara stared at them for a long time, unsettled by how gentle they looked in such an unreal place. A nurse came in and smiled. She said the doctor wanted Mara to rest for several more hours, just to be safe. The baby's heartbeat was strong. The cut on her wrist had been cleaned. Her blood pressure was better. Mara nodded and thanked her, but her mind kept drifting back to the man in the black suit, Dante Moretti. She knew the name now, because she had heard nurses whisper it at the desk, and because one of the orderlies had gone pale when he looked through the door and saw Dante standing in the hallway before sunrise. He had stayed all night. Mara did not understand that. Men like Dante did not stay in hospitals for women like her. Men like Dante did not sit quietly outside rooms with their hands folded and their eyes fixed on the floor, as if waiting for a verdict from God. Yet when the door opened later that morning, he stepped inside carrying a paper cup of coffee and wearing the same dark suit, though his tie was gone and his face looked tired in a way that made him seem almost human. Mara pushed herself up against the pillows. "You're still here." Dante stopped near the foot of the bed, careful not to come too close. "Yes, you didn't have to be. I know." She looked down at the blanket tucked around her stomach. The nurse said the hospital bill was already handled. It was. "I told you I can't accept that, and I told you it is a debt." Mara's mouth tightened. Even exhausted, even bruised by humiliation, there was still a quiet steel inside her. "I'm serious. I don't like owing people. Owing people gives them a way to own you." Dante studied her for a moment, and something like respect softened the edge of his face. "Then you will repay it when you are ready, not before." "With what money?" "Not all debts are paid with money." That made her look up. Suspicion flickered in her eyes. She had lived long enough to know that gentle words could hide ugly meanings. Dante seemed to read her fear before it fully formed. "I will not ask you for anything you do not choose to give, Mara." Her name sounded different in his voice. Not pretty, not sweet, important. Like a thing he had waited years to say. She did not know what to do with that, so she reached for the tea and took a small sip. Her hands still shook. Dante noticed but said nothing. For once, Mara was grateful for silence. Most people filled silence because they were afraid of what might rise inside it. Dante seemed comfortable there, as if silence was one of his oldest rooms. When she was released that afternoon, a car waited behind the hospital, away from the main entrance. Mara expected to go back to her small apartment, but Dante's driver took a different route. She sat straighter in the back seat, alarm crawling up her spine. "This isn't my neighborhood." "No," Dante said from beside her. "The building manager at your place spoke to reporters this morning. Your address is no longer private." Mara's face went cold. "Reporters? Someone leaked your name." She turned toward the window, watching clean streets give way to old brick buildings and rain-dark corners. "Bianca. Maybe. You know it was her. I know many things. Knowing and proving are not the same." Mara let out a tired laugh that held no humor. "That must be nice, to have time for proof." Dante's gaze sharpened, not with anger at her, but because the words had found a bruise. "I am taking you somewhere safe. I didn't agree to that." "No. Then why are we going?" "Because last night a wealthy family showed an entire room that they were willing to let you be blamed for their daughter's cruelty. Today they will try to turn that cruelty into a story that protects them. You are tired. You are pregnant. And you should not have to fight wolves from a hallway with a broken lock." Mara looked at him for a long time. "You talk like you've seen that happen before." Dante looked out the window. "I have seen worse." The safe apartment was not a palace. That surprised her. It was a quiet place in an old building with strong doors, warm wood floors, thick curtains, and a small kitchen that smelled faintly of lemon soap. There was a bedroom with clean sheets, a pantry already filled, and a window overlooking a narrow garden where winter trees held rain in their bare branches. It was nice enough to feel safe, but not so grand that it made her feel mocked. Mara stood in the living room with one hand on her belly and one hand holding the strap of the small bag the hospital had given her. "You arranged this fast. I own the building." "Of course you do." A faint shadow of amusement touched his eyes. "You may stay as long as you need. I'll pay rent." "No." Dante. It was the first time she said his name, and the room changed around it. His gaze lifted to her face, quiet and deep. Mara swallowed. "I mean it. I'll pay what I can." "Then pay what you can when you can. Keep the receipts if it helps your pride sleep at night." Her eyes narrowed, but the corner of her mouth moved before she could stop it. That was almost a joke. It was an attempt. "Needs work. For you, I will practice." The softness of that sentence scared her more than his power did. Mara turned away first, pretending to study the kitchen cabinets while her heart stumbled in a direction she did not trust. Kindness from dangerous men was still dangerous. She knew that, but there was something in Dante's quiet care that did not feel like a trap. It felt like a door being held open without a hand pushing her through it. For a few days, peace almost touched her life. Dante did not move in. He did not crowd her. He sent groceries through the building manager and arranged rides to her doctor appointments without asking her to sit beside him unless she wanted to. A woman named Rosa, who spoke gently and laughed with her whole face, checked on Mara every morning and pretended not to be security. Mara knew she was, but liked her anyway. At night, Mara sat by the window with a blanket over her lap and spoke softly to the baby. She told her about cinnamon rolls cooling on bakery racks, about the river after rain, about how some people were cruel because they were empty, and some people were quiet because they were full of things they could not say. She promised that whatever happened, her child would never have to earn love by becoming smaller. But the city had teeth, and it had not finished biting. The rumor began with a whisper from the charity kitchen. Then it became a phone call, then an email, then a headline on a gossip page with Mara's name spelled wrong, but her shame spelled clearly enough. Several guests from a smaller charity banquet had become sick after eating desserts prepared in the St. Aurelia kitchen. A bottle of allergen extract had been found in Mara's locker. Cash had been discovered inside an envelope tucked beneath her spare apron. People said she had done it because she was angry about being removed from the gala. Others said she was trying to force a settlement from the foundation. No one asked why a pregnant woman with no power would poison people who had already ruined her life. Mara learned about it from her old supervisor, who called not to warn her, but to tell her she was suspended. By sunset, she was fired. By the next morning, the bakery let her go too, quietly and apologetically, saying they could not risk being connected to scandal. The landlord at her old apartment left a message saying her belongings would be placed outside if she did not collect them by Friday. He did not want trouble in his building. Trouble, Mara realized, was what people called you when they wanted to stop feeling guilty for throwing you away. Dante came to the apartment that evening and found her sitting on the kitchen floor, surrounded by old baby clothes she had taken from boxes after finally going back to collect her things. She was folding the tiny shirts with trembling hands, one after another, though they were already folded. He stood in the doorway and said her name softly. Mara did not look at him. "I didn't do it." "I know." "You don't know. You believe me. That's different." "I know," he repeated. She laughed, but it broke halfway through. "Everyone knows something about me right now. They know I'm greedy. They know I'm unstable. They know I'm a poor fat girl who wanted attention. They know I'm the kind of woman who would hurt people for money. Isn't it amazing how much people know when they never once bothered to ask me who I was? Dante crossed the room and lowered himself to the floor across from her. He did not tell her to calm down. He did not say it would be fine. He only sat there, on the kitchen floor in his expensive coat, and let her anger have room. "I can fix this," he said. Mara's hands tightened around a tiny yellow shirt. By doing what? Making people afraid? If necessary. That won't clear my name. It will only make them think I really am connected to something dirty. His jaw worked once. "You are connected to me. I didn't ask to be." The words hurt him. She saw it, quick and hidden, but real. For a moment, guilt softened her anger. Then fear swallowed it again. "I'm grateful," she whispered. "I am. But I can't become a woman people only respect because they're scared of the man standing behind her. I need my name back. Mine. Not yours over it like a shadow." Dante was silent for a long time. Then he nodded. "Then we get your name back your way." She finally looked at him. "And what is my way?" "Truth." The first thread came from the kitchen supervisor, a bitter man named Joel who had smiled at Mara for years and complained whenever she got extra shifts. Dante's people found out Joel had recently paid off gambling debts he should not have been able to afford. The second thread led to Adrian Vale, Bianca's brother, who had been quietly trying to save the Vale family business from collapse. Dante had withdrawn a planned investment after the gala, and that single decision had pushed the Vales closer to ruin. The third thread led to Lucian Cross, Dante's oldest enemy, a man who never entered a fight straight on when he could poison the ground first. Lucian understood power the way snakes understood warmth. He had seen Dante step into the ballroom for Mara. He had seen the city's coldest man show care in public. To Lucian, that made Mara not a woman, not a mother, not a person with a life inside her, but a weak spot. Mara tried to stay steady, while Dante worked in silence. She looked for jobs under her own name, and was turned away. She visited one shelter after another, not because she needed a bed anymore, but because she wanted to remind herself what would have happened if Dante had not opened that apartment door. At one shelter, a woman recognized her from the gossip page and shifted her purse away. Mara went home that night and cried in the shower until the water ran cold. Still, she refused to hide completely. She went to her doctor. She walked in the garden. She bought bread from the corner store. With cash from the little savings she still considered hers. She lived quietly, but she did not disappear. That was why Lucian's men found her outside a closed laundromat 2 weeks later, after she had gone to wash the last of the baby blankets herself. The street was wet and empty. The neon sign buzzed weakly above the door. Mara had one hand on her laundry bag and the other on her belly when a black car rolled to the curb. 2 men stepped out. They were not loud. That made them worse. One smiled and said, "Mara Bell?" She backed toward the laundromat door, but it was locked. "I don't know you." "No, but you know Dante Moretti." Her stomach tightened. "I need to go." "We need 5 minutes." "I said I need to go." The second man moved just enough to block the sidewalk. Not touching her, not yet. The first man held up an envelope. "There is money in here, enough for a new apartment, enough for the baby, enough to make the charges against you disappear." Mara's fingers curled around the laundry bag. "What do you want?" "A statement, simple. You say Dante paid you to tamper with desserts at the charity banquet so he could disgrace the board and take control of the foundation." Mara stared at him, stunned by the ugliness of it. "That's not true. Truth is expensive. You look like a woman who could use something cheaper." Fear moved through her, cold and sharp, but beneath it came anger. Slow anger, clean anger, the kind that stood up inside her even when her knees wanted to shake. "You framed me." The man smiled. "You were already easy to frame. People like believing bad things about women like you." Mara's eyes burned. "Women like me? Poor, alone, emotional, Pregnant by some man who clearly isn't around. Come on, Mara, sign the paper. Let Dante take the fall. Men like him survive everything. You might not. The baby moved then, a firm little kick against her palm. Mara looked down at her stomach, and the fear changed shape. She thought of the life inside her, listening in its own quiet way. She thought of the lessons children learn before words, from the tremble in a mother's body, from the choices made when no one kind is watching. She could take the money. She could buy safety for a little while. She could let a lie build a roof over her head. But one day, that roof would still be made of lies. She looked back at the men. No. The smile faded. Think carefully. I did. Dante won't always be close enough to save you. I'm not refusing because of Dante. The men exchanged a glance. Mara lifted her chin. Her voice shook, but it did not break. I'm refusing because my child will not begin life protected by a lie that hurts someone innocent. The first man stepped closer. You really want to be brave right now? No, Mara whispered. I'm terrified. That seemed to amuse him. Then headlights washed over the street. The black car at the curb was suddenly trapped between two dark vehicles that appeared from opposite ends of the block. Doors opened. Men stepped out. Quiet, controlled and fast. Dante emerged last, his coat moving slightly in the wet wind, his eyes fixed on Mara, as if the rest of the street did not exist. The men near her froze. Dante did not raise his voice. Step away from her. They did. Mara should have felt relieved, but the adrenaline broke inside her all at once. Her laundry bag slipped from her hand. She pressed both palms to her stomach and tried to breathe. Dante reached her in seconds, stopping close enough to steady her, but still waiting for permission. Mara. She looked up at him, and the street blurred. I said no. I know. They wanted me to lie about you. I know. I was scared. His face changed then. Not much, but enough. The cold boss disappeared, and the man from the hospital hallway returned. You should not have had to be brave alone. Mara gave a small, broken laugh. I'm always brave alone. Dante's eyes lowered to her wrist, to the old burn scar and the faded blue thread. Rain gathered on his lashes. For years he had carried the truth like a locked door inside his chest. But watching her stand there, shaking and still honest, he knew silence had become another kind of lie. No, he said softly. Not always. Mara frowned. He looked at the men around them. Leave us. His guards dragged Lucian's men away without drama, and within moments, the street was quiet except for rain tapping against the laundromat windows. Dante removed his coat and placed it around Mara's shoulders. She was too tired to argue. There is something I should have told you sooner, he said. Mara watched him carefully. Years ago, before I became what I am now, I was hunted. I was young, bleeding, and foolish enough to think I could outrun men who knew every alley in the city. There was a storm that night. I found an open back door at a bakery. The world seemed to tilt. Mara's hand moved slowly to her wrist. Dante's voice remained calm, but something deep trembled beneath it. A woman found me in the flower room. She could have screamed. She could have called the men looking for me. Instead, she hid me. She cleaned the wound in my side. She lied to save my life. She burned her wrist on a hot tray because of me, and never complained. Mara's breath caught. The laundromat, the rain, the street, all of it faded into the memory of another storm, another night, another version of herself. She had been younger then, working late at a neighborhood bakery that closed before dawn. She remembered the wounded stranger with blood on his shirt and wild fear in his eyes. She remembered telling him to stay quiet behind flour sacks. She remembered men pounding on the back door, asking if she had seen anyone. She remembered the tray burning her wrist when she grabbed it too fast, trying to look busy. She remembered coming back after sunrise and finding him gone. You, she whispered. Dante nodded once. Me. I didn't know your name. I know. I thought you died. I almost did. She stared at him, tears filling her eyes again, but these were different, older, deeper. You remembered? I searched for you for years. Mara shook her head, as if the truth was too large to fit inside her tired mind.
Why didn't you tell me?
Because you had already been humiliated by people who treated you like your dignity was nothing.
I did not want my gratitude to feel like another weight placed on your shoulders.
She looked away. I saved a stranger, that was all. Dante stepped closer, his voice low and rough with honesty. No, you saved a man who had nothing left but rage. For years, I thought power was the only reason I survived. But it wasn't. It was one act of mercy, from a woman who had no reason to offer it. Mara's tears spilled. She wiped them angrily with the back of her hand, but Dante did not move to touch her without permission. You're not helping me because you pity me, she said. No. Or because I'm weak. No. Then why? He looked at her as if the answer had lived in him for a long time. Because you were kind when kindness cost you. Because the world keeps mistaking your gentleness for permission. Because I owe you my life, Mara. And because somewhere between that night and this one, the debt became something more. She closed her eyes. The baby shifted softly between them. When she opened them again, her voice was barely a whisper. I don't know how to trust that. Then don't trust it all at once. That was what made her cry hardest. Not a promise, not a demand, just room. Dante cleared Mara's name without turning her into a spectacle. He did not storm the city with threats. He did not spill blood in the streets. His revenge moved with the quiet patience of winter. The kitchen supervisor confessed after the payment trail surfaced, and the video of him planting the bottle in Mara's locker reached the foundation board. Adrian Vale's accounts were opened like rotten fruit, revealing fraud, hidden debts, and desperate transfers from shell companies tied to Lucian Cross. The charity foundation issued a public apology with polished words that sounded noble, but everyone knew fear had written them. Mara watched the news from the apartment couch with a blanket over her knees. Her name was cleared. The guests who had whispered about her guilt now spoke of unfortunate misunderstandings. The same people who had called her unstable began calling her resilient, as if changing the word erased the wound. Job offers appeared from people who had ignored her applications before. Saint Aurelia asked if she would consider returning in a better role. The bakery owner called 3 times, crying through apologies. Mara did not answer right away. She needed time to remember herself, without everyone else's story pressed over her face. The Vale family fell slowly. Then all at once, investors withdrew. Old friends stopped returning calls. Invitations disappeared. Bianca's perfect world cracked under the weight of its own cruelty. Evelyn Vale sold jewelry she once wore to charity dinners. Adrian left the city under the excuse of business overseas, though everyone knew he was running from shame and debt. Lucian Cross lost partners too. Not because they became good men, but because they learned he had made the mistake of using a pregnant woman as bait against Dante Moretti. Even among wolves, some mistakes smelled like weakness. One cold afternoon, when the sky was pale and heavy with snow, Bianca came to Mara. Rosa tried to stop her at the building entrance, but Mara saw the camera feed and asked to let her up. Bianca entered the apartment in a plain coat, her blonde hair loose, her face smaller without diamonds and admirers around it. She looked around the simple room, at the baby blankets folded by the couch, the tea on the table, the wildflowers drying in a glass jar by the window. For the first time since Mara had known her, Bianca Vale looked uncertain. I need your help, Bianca said. Mara stood near the kitchen counter, one hand resting on her lower back. She was very pregnant now, round and tired and calm, in a way that surprised even herself. With what? Dante listens to you. No, he respects me. That's not the same. Bianca swallowed. My family is ruined. Mara said nothing. My brother made terrible choices. My mother pushed things too far. I know that. But Dante could stop this from getting worse. Could he? Bianca's eyes filled with tears. Please, I'm begging you. Mara looked at the woman who had shoved her into broken glass and then called herself the victim. For a moment, she waited for satisfaction to come. She thought it might feel sweet, seeing Bianca without power, without the crowd, without that sharp little smile. But it did not feel sweet. It felt sad, empty, like standing in the ruins of a house and knowing the fire had been set long before anyone saw flames. You thought money made you untouchable, Mara said quietly. Bianca wiped her cheek. I was angry. No, you were cruel. Anger is a feeling. Cruelty is a choice. Bianca lowered her eyes. You did not hate me because of syrup on a dress. You hated that someone like me was in the same room as you. Poor, fat, working, pregnant, visible. You wanted me back in the place you thought I belonged. I'm sorry, Bianca whispered. Mara believed that Bianca was sorry now, but regret after consequences was not the same as goodness. Dignity is not something money gives you, Mara said. It is how you treat people who cannot fight back. That night, you thought I could not fight back. Bianca looked up, hope trembling in her face. So you'll talk to him? No. The word was soft, but final. Bianca flinched. I won't ask Dante to save your family from what they did, but I won't hate you either. I don't want to carry you into the next part of my life. Bianca stood there for a moment, lost in the strange mercy of not being hated and the sharper pain of not being rescued. Then she nodded once, turned, and left without another word. Mara watched the door close and felt the baby move, slow and strong. She pressed her palm there and whispered, We don't have to become what hurt us. The baby came 3 weeks early during a storm. Rain struck the hospital windows in silver lines, just as it had the night Mara first saved Dante. She labored for hours with Rosa on one side, and Dante standing near the wall at first, still and pale, as if every sound of pain cut through him. Mara finally reached for him during a contraction, and he came to her so quickly the nurse nearly laughed. She gripped his hand hard enough to leave marks. He did not flinch once. When the baby cried for the first time, Mara broke open with a sob so full of relief that everyone in the room went quiet. A girl. Small, warm, furious, alive. Mara held her daughter against her chest, while rain washed the windows, and the whole city blurred beyond the glass. Dante stood beside the bed, looking down at the baby with an expression Mara had never seen on him before. Wonder, pure and helpless wonder. She's perfect, Mara whispered. Yes, Dante said. His voice was rough. She is. Mara looked up at him, exhausted and shining with tears. Her name is Elise. Dante's face softened. It suits her. She needs a middle name. He waited. Mara looked at the wildflowers on the small table beside the bed, brought by Dante again, simple and rain-specked. Hope. Dante closed his eyes briefly, as if the name had touched some place inside him that power never reached. Elise Hope Bell slept against her mother's heart while the storm slowly moved east. In the weeks that followed, Mara's life did not become a fairy tale. That was not what she wanted. Fairy tales ended too neatly, and Mara had learned that real healing came in ordinary mornings. It came in feeding a baby at sunrise while the city was still quiet. It came in taking slow walks through the garden with Dante beside her, not holding her up, just walking at her pace. It came in answering the bakery owner's call and saying she forgave her, but would not be coming back. It came in accepting a position with the charity foundation only after the board agreed to her terms, safer staff policies, emergency support for pregnant workers, and a public fund for women in crisis who had nowhere else to go. The first day Mara returned to St. Aurelia, she did not wear a servant's uniform. She wore a soft navy dress that fit her body without hiding it, and she carried Elise in a sling against her chest. People turned when she entered the hall. Some looked ashamed, some looked curious, some looked afraid, because Dante Moretti walked behind her, quiet as a shadow. But Mara did not need his shadow to enter the room. She walked in on her own feet. The dessert tower had been rebuilt. It stood near the same place, sparkling and perfect beneath the chandeliers. Mara paused before it for only a moment. Then she smiled, not because the memory no longer hurt, but because it no longer owned her. Dante watched from a few steps away. "Are you all right?" Mara looked down at Elise, who was sleeping peacefully, one tiny hand curled against her mother's chest. "I think I am." He came beside her, close but not crowding. That had become his way with her. Near enough to protect, far enough to respect. "I never thanked you properly," he said. Mara smiled faintly. "For the bakery? For that? For the laundromat? For every time you chose kindness when the world gave you reasons not to? You don't have to keep paying back a debt forever." Dante looked at her, and this time there was no darkness in his eyes, only truth. "I am not here because of debt anymore." Mara's breath caught, but she did not look away. The ballroom around them shimmered with candlelight. Outside, the city moved on, unaware that something quiet and powerful had ended inside those walls, and something gentler had begun. Mara thought of the frightened young woman she had been, wrapping her arms around her belly on the floor while everyone watched. She wished she could reach back and tell that version of herself that she was not alone, not ruined, not small. She wished she could tell her that one day she would return to that room with her child safe, her name restored, and her heart still her own. Dante brushed his fingers lightly against the blue thread bracelet still tied around her wrist. It was faded, almost white now, worn thin by years of work, fear, and survival. "You still wear it," he said. Mara looked at the bracelet. "It reminds me that I survived things quietly before anyone saw me." Dante nodded. "I saw you. I know." And this time, she believed him. Marabelle did not become powerful because a dangerous man protected her. She had been powerful long before Dante Moretti found her again. She had been powerful when she worked tired shifts with swollen feet. She had been powerful when she protected her unborn child on a ballroom floor. She had been powerful when she refused to lie outside a closed laundromat with fear shaking in her bones. Dante did not give her worth. He only helped the world stop pretending it could not see it. And as years passed, people in the city would tell the story in many ways. Some would say Dante Moretti destroyed the Vale family because they crossed him. Some would say he ruined Lucian Cross because no enemy touched what he cared for and survived. Some would whisper that the quiet woman beside him had once saved his life in a bakery during a storm, and that every act of mercy leaves a mark somewhere, even when no one knows your name. But Mara would tell Elise a softer version. She would say that kindness is never wasted. She would say that dignity does not depend on wealth, beauty, or the approval of people who only respect power. She would say that gentle people are not weak, and that sometimes the ones the world steps over are the very ones holding the light. And on rainy nights when the city windows glowed gold and Dante stood beside her with Elise sleeping between them, Mara would touch the old scar on her wrist and remember the night she saved a stranger. She had thought it was a small thing then, one frightened act of mercy in the dark. She had not known that kindness could travel through years. She had not known it could return as protection, justice, and love. She had not known it could come back wearing a black suit, carrying wildflowers, and saying her name like a promise. But it had.